Good evening, everyone. Yoka, hi. Um, Today is our monthly reading stream, but one of our goals was oh, well, okay, what happened? What happened? Is everyone able to hear me correctly? Is everyone able to hear like the oh, oh okay. Um, your audio is a little low. Wait, how I'm speaking? I can go up a bit. How about now? How about my mic? Is that okay now? It's at negative 6.9. Checking 1 2 3. Checking 1 2 3. Is this better? Um. Well, I don't know why you're saying that. It sounds static, or is it raining? It's raining. And hi, Bunny. Hi, Alice too. Yes. This is usually. We always have sound effects during our rating stream. Years of habit. Mic up more. Okay. How about we just go to. Hello? How about now? It's now at negative, well, it's at 0 now. Want to stop in before I sleepy. Yes, it's spoopy. And yes, thank you. This is actually what Kia was helping me behind the background. We're using, yes. Yes, Kia was helping me with the program that she likes to hear ASMR artists do. It's called, uh, let me see. I think it's called Shoots. Let's see. Yep, it shoots. It has like it's kind of like its own VTube Studios, except you can actually add scenes. No, Alice, no. Pet, 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 pet. So, in case anyone's wondering, there's gonna be almost no sound alerts here at all. Oh, by the way, do I sound okay now? Um, you hear like the rain perfectly well? Okay, better audio. Yeah, no sound alerts at all. So you guys can be playing Pirates of the Caribbean over and over again. So this is gonna be a very chill reading stream. As the title suggested, it is a solo reading stream. It is part of the 24-hour subathon goal that we actually did make. So we're doing it instead of us like doing the dual streaming audio reading stream. We decided just to be me, just so that just for me for today. We will be getting back to our normal schedule next month, where we will have our annual reading stream with the other Yokai members, assuming that they want to read with us again. Oh, thank you for the health check. I already ate, so I'm gonna skip on the snacky, but I will take that hydrate and I will stretch and do a posture check. So thank you very much. Give me one moment. Thank you. Posture check and hydrate. Give me one moment. Let me just receive this really quick. Okay. So for tonight's reading, we're going to actually read Sherlock Holmes. Yes, it is done by the famous Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. So this is gonna be an interesting read. It is I'm not sure if I'll be able to complete it tonight, but I will try my best. It is almost the exact same length as the Alice in Wonderland stream story. Okay, without further ado, everyone go ahead and get comfortable or listen to the. Everyone get comfortable, get yourself a little snack while we read a story for today. Does that sound good for everyone? I think that sounds perfect. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Yes, happy bedtime story, everyone. Today's story, like I said, it is the Sherlock Holmes series. The first book for Sherlock Holmes is A Study in Scarlet. I have no idea what this is about, but I do like reading Sherlock Holmes. Look, I like watching movies about Sherlock Holmes. I have never once read a book about Sherlock Holmes. So let's see how. Yeah, let's go ahead and get started, everyone. A Study in Scarlet by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Okay, buddy. Part 1, Chapter 1. Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Let's see. Should I do voice acting for this? I'll try my best. In the year 1878. This is, I think this is the Dr. Watson. In the year 1878, I took my degree of Doctor of Medicine of the University of London, and proceeded to neatly to go through the course prescribed for surgeons in the army. Having completed my studies there, I was duly attached to the 5th Northumberland Fusiliers of Assistant Surgeon. The regiment was stationed in India at the time, and before I could join it, the Second Afghan War has broken out. On landing on Bombay, I learned that my corps had advanced through the passes, and was already deep in the enemy's country. I followed, however, with many other officers who were in the same situation as myself, and succeeded in reaching Kandahar in safety, where I found my regiment and at once entered upon my new duties. I judge you. The campaign brought honors and promotion to many, but for me it had nothing but misfortune and disaster. I was removed from my brigade and attached to the Berkshires, with whom I served at the fatal battle of Maiwand. There I was struck on the shoulder by a dissolved bullet, which shattered the bone and grazed the subclavian artery. I should have fallen into the hands of the murderous Ghazis, had it not been for the devotion and courage shown by Murray, my orderly, who threw me across it backwards and succeeded in bringing me safely to the British lines. Worn with pain and weak from the prolonged hardships which I had undergone, I was removed with a great train of wounded sufferers to the base hospital of Berkshire. Here I rallied and had already improved so far as to be able to walk about the wards, and even to bask a little upon the verandah when I was struck down by enteric fever, that curse of our Indian possessions. For months my life was past despaired of, and when at last I came to myself and became convalescent, I was so weak and emaciated that the medical board determined that not a day should be lost in sending me back to England. I was dispatched according in the Troopshire Orientals, and landed a month later on Portsmouth jetty, with my healthy irreparable ruined, with a permission from a paternal government to spend the next 9 months in an attempt to improve it. I had neither kith nor kin in England, and was therefore as free as air, or as free as an income of 11 shillings and 6 pence a day will permit a man to be. Under such circumstances, I naturally gravitated to London, that great cesspool into which all the loungers and idlers of the empire are irresistibly drained. There I stayed for some time at a private hotel in the Strand, leading a comfortless, meaningless existence, and spending such money as I had, considerably more freely than I ought. So alarming did my state of my finances become that I soon realized that I must either leave the metropolis and vegetate somewhere in the country, or that I must make a complete alteration in my style of living. Choosing the latter alternatively, I began by making up my mind to leave the hotel and to take up the quarters in some less contentious and less expensive domicile. On the very day that I had come to this conclusion, I was standing at the Citerian bar when someone tapped me on the shoulder, and turning around I recognized young Stamford, who had been a dresser under me at Bart's. The sight of a friendly face in the great wilderness of London is a pleasant thing indeed to a lonely man. In old days Stamford had never been a particular crony of mine, but now I hailed him with enthusiasm, and he, as in turn, appeared to be delighted to see me. In the exuberance of my joy, I asked him to lunch with me at the Holborn, and we started off together in hansom. "Whatever have you been doing yourself, Watson?" he asked in undisguised, and we rattled through the crowded London street. "You are as thin as a lath and as brown as a nut." I gave him a short skirt of my adventures, and had hardly concluded it by the time that we reached our destination. "Poor devil!" he said, considerably after he had listened to my misfortunes. "What are you up to now?" "Looking for lodgings." "3," I answered, trying to solve the problem as to whether it is possible to get comfortable rooms at a reasonable price. "That's a strange thing," remarked my companion. "You are the second man today that has used that expression to me." "And who was the first?" I asked. "A fellow who was working in the chemical laboratory at the hospital. He was bemoaning himself this morning because he could not get someone to go halves with him in some nice rooms which he had found, and which were too much for his purse." "By Jove!" I cried. "If he really wants someone to share the rooms and the expense, I am the very man for him. I should prefer him having a partner to being alone." Young Stamford looked rather strangely at me over his wine glass. "You don't know Sherlock Holmes yet?" he said. "Perhaps you could not care for him as a constant companion." "Why? What is there against him?" "Oh, I didn't say that there was anything against him. He is a little queer in his ideas, and the enthusiasm of some branches of science. As far as I know, he's a decent fellow enough." "A medical student, I suppose?" said I. "No, I have no idea what he intends to go in for. I believe he is well up in anatomy, and he is first-class chemist. But as far as I know, he has never taken out the systematic medical classes. His studies are very desultory and eccentric, but he's amassed a lot of our out-of-the-way knowledge which would astonish his professors." "Did you never ask him what he was going in for?" I asked. "No, he is not a man that is easy to draw out, though he can be communicative enough when his fancy seizes him." "I should like to meet him," I said. "If I am to lodge with anyone, I should prefer a man with studious and quiet habits. I am not strong enough yet to stand much noise or excitement. I had enough of both in Afghanistan to last me for the remainder of my natural existence. How could I meet this friend of yours?" "He is sure to be in the laboratory," returned my companion. "He either avoids the place for weeks, or else he works from morn to night. If you like, we shall drive around together after luncheon." "Certainly," I answered, and the conversation drifted off into the other channels. As we made our way to the hospital after leaving the Holborn, Stanford gave me a few more particulars about the gentleman who I proposed to take as a fellow lodger. "You mustn't blame me if you don't get on with him," he said. "I know nothing more than him than I have learned from meeting him occasionally in the laboratory. You propose this arrangement, so you must not hold me responsible." If we don't get on it, it will be easy to part company," I answered. "It seems to me, Stanford," I added, looking hard at the companion, that you have some reason for washing your hands of the matter. Is this fellow's temper so formidable, or what is it? Don't be mealy-mouthed about it. It is not easy to express the expensible, he answered with a laugh. Holmes is a little too scientific for my sakes. It approaches too cold-bloodedness. I could imagine his giving a friend a little pinch and the latest vegetable alkaloid. Not like the malevolence, you understand, but simply out of the spirit of inquiry in order to have an accurate idea of the effects. To do him justice, I think he will take in himself the same readiness. He appears to have a passion or different of exacting knowledge. Very right, too. Yes, but it may be pushed to excessive. When it comes to beating the subjects or dissecting wounds with a stick, it is sort of taken rather a bizarre shape. Beating the subjects? Yes, to verify how far bruises may be profound after death. I saw him at it with my own eyes. And yet you say he is not a medical student? No. Heavens knows what the object of studies are. But here we are, and you must form your own impressions about him. As he spoke, we turned down a narrow lane, and passed the small side door, which opened into a wing of the hospital, great hospital. It was a familiar ground to me, and I needed no guiding as we ascended the bleak stone staircase and made our way down to a long corridor with a vista of whitewashed wall and decolored rooms. Near the further end, a low arched passage branched away from it and led to a chemical laboratory. This was a lofty chamber, lined and littered with countless bottles. Broad low tables were scattered about, which bristled with retorts, test tubes, and little buskin lamps. But their blue flickering flames. There was only one student in the room, who was bending over a distant table, absorbed in his work. At the sound of our steps, he glanced round and sprang to his feet with a cry of pleasure. "I found it! I found it!" he shouted to my companion, running towards us with a test tube in his hand. "I have found a reagent which is prescription of hemoglobin, for and by nothing else." Had he discovered a gold mine, greater delight could not have shone upon his features. "Dr. Watson, Mr. Sherlock Holmes," said Stanford, introducing us. "How are you?" he said. "How are you?" he said cordially, gripping my hand with a strength for which I should hardly have given him credit. "You have been in Afghanistan, I perceive." "How on earth did you know?" I asked in astonishment. "Never mind," said he, chuckling to himself. "The question now is about hemoglobin. No doubt you see the significance of my discovery of mine." "It is interesting, chemically, no doubt," I answered. "But practically—" "Why, man, is it the most practical, medical, legal discovery for years? Don't you see that it gives us infallible tests of blood stains? Come over here now." He seized me to the coat sleeve of the eagerness and drew me over the table at which he had been working. "Let us have some fresh blood," he said, digging the long bodkin of his fingers and drawing off the resulting drop of blood in the chemical pipette. "Now, I will add some small quantity of blood in a liter of water. You perceive from the results the mixture has the appearance of pure water. The proportion of blood cannot be more than 1 in a million. I have no doubt, however, that we shall be able to obtain the characteristic reaction." As he spoke, he threw into a vessel a few white crystals, and added some drops of transparent fluid. In an instant, the concentrate assumed a dull mulberry color, and a brownish dust was precipitated to the bottom of the glass jar. "Ha ha!" he cried, clapping his hands, looking as delighted as a child with a new toy. "What do you think of that?" "It seems to be a very delicate test," I remarked. "Beautiful, beautiful! The old Gilliam test was very clumsy and uncertain. So is the microscopic examination of blood corpuscles. The latter is valueless if the stains are a few hours old. Now, this appears to act as well whether the blood is old or new. Had this test been invented, there are hundreds of men now walking the earth who could long ago have paid the penalty for their crimes." "Indeed," I murmured. "Criminal cases are continuous hinge upon the one point. A man is suspected of a crime months perhaps after it has been committed. His line of clothes are examined, and brownish stains discovered upon them. Are they bloodstains, or mud stains, or rust stains, or fruit stains, or what are they? That is the question which was puzzle many an expert. And why? Because there's no reliable test. Now we have Sherlock Holmes test, and there will no longer be any difficulty. His eyes fairly glittered as he spoke, and put his hand over his heart, and bowed at his own applauding crowd conjured by his own imagination. You are too, you are to be congratulated, I remarked, considering surprise at his enthusiasm. There was a case of Von Bishop at Frankfurt last year. He would certainly have been hung had this test been in existence. Then there was Mason of Brantford, the notorious Moeller, and Liver of Montpellier, and Sampson of New Orleans. I could name 4 cases in which it would have been decisive. You seem to be a walking account of crime, said Stanford with a laugh. You might start a paper on those lines. Call it the police news of the past. Very interesting reading it might be made too, remarked Sherlock Holmes, sticking a small piece of plaster over the prick of his finger. I had to be careful, he continued, turning to me with a smile, for a dabble with poison is a good deal. He held out his hands as he spoke, and noticed that it was all malted over a similar piece of plaster, and discolored with strong acids. We came here on business, said Stanford, sitting down on a high 3-legged stool, and pushing another one in my direction with his foot. My friend here wants to take Dickens, and you were complaining that you could not get one to go halves with you. I thought that I had better bring you together. Sherlock Holmes seemed delighted at the sharing his rooms with me. I have my eye on a suite in Baker Street, he said, which would suit us down to the ground. You don't mind the smell of strong tobacco, I hope. I always smoke ships myself, I answered. That's good enough. I generally have chemicals about and occasionally do experiments. Would that annoy you? By no means. Let me see. What are the other shortcomings? I get... Let's see. Let me see. What are my other shortcomings? I get the dumps at times and don't open my mouth for days on end. You must not think I sulk you when I do that. Just let me alone and I'll soon be right. What have you to confess? It's just as well as for 2 fellows to know the worst of one another before they begin to live together. I laughed in his cross-examination. I keep a bull pup, I said, and I object to rows because my nerves are shaken, and I get up at all sorts of ungodly hours, and I'm extremely lazy. I have another set of vices when I'm well, but those are my principles at present. Do you include violin playing at the category of rows? He asked anxiously. It depends on the player, I answered. A well-played violin is a treat for the god. A badly played one. Oh, that's all right, he cried, with a merry laugh. I think we may consider the thing as settled. That is, if the rooms are agreeable to you. When shall we see them? Call me here at noon tomorrow, and we'll go together and settle everything, he answered. All right, noon exactly, said I, shaking his hand. We left him working among his chemicals, and we walked together towards my hotel. By the way, I asked suddenly, stopping and turning against Stanford, how the deuce did he know that I had come from Afghanistan? My companion smiled an enigmatic smile. That's just his little peculiar, he said. A good many people have wanted to know how he finds things out. Oh, a mystery it is, I cried, rubbing my hands. This is very piquant, I am. Much obliged for you bringing us together. The proper study of mankind is mad, you know. You must study him, then, Stanford said as he bade me goodbye. You'll find him a knotty problem, though. I wager he learns more about you than you about him. Goodbye. Goodbye, I answered, and stole through the hotel, considerably interested in my new acquaintance. Chapter 1 complete. Alright, let's read some chat. Let's say... yes, close time. And that's it. Perfect. Another hydrate, everyone. One moment, please. Good chapter. Um, this kind of reminds me. If has anyone watched the before I begin chapter two? Has anyone watched the BBC of Sherlock Holmes? I think the first one is called A Study in Pink. I can see how the scene played out, so it looks pretty good. Yes, Penny. Hmm. Yeah. If anyone is interested, you should. I would recommend watching the BBC of Sherlock Holmes. It's a great series, but I would also watching the movies too. Oh, then I can't wait for the blankie. Then can't wait. It's cold right now. It's cold because it's raining outside. Ooh. Okay, let's just begin chapter two. Chapter two: The Science of Deduction. We met the next day, as we had arranged, and inspected the rooms at number 221B, 5 Baker Street, of which he had spoken at our meeting. They consisted of a couple of comfortable bedrooms and a single largely airy sitting room, cheerfully furnished and illuminated by two broad windows. So desirable in every way were the apartments, and so moderate did the terms seem when divided between us, that the bargain was concluded upon the spot. We at once entered in possession. The very evening I moved my things round from the hotel, and on the following morning Sherlock Holmes followed me with several boxes and primitives. For a day or two we were busily employed in unpacking and laying out our property at the best advantage. That done, we gradually began to settle down and to accommodate ourselves to our new surroundings. Holmes was certainly not a difficult man to live with. He was polite in his ways, and his habits were regular. It was rare for him to go after 10 at night, and he had invariably breakfasted and gone out before I rose in the morning. Sometimes he spent his days at the chemical laboratory, sometimes in the dissecting rooms, and occasionally in long watch which appeared to take him into the lowest portion of the city. Nothing could exceed his energy when working fit was upon him. But now and again a reaction would seize him, and for days on end he would lie upon the sofa in the sitting room, hardly uttering a word, or moving a muscle from morning to night. On these occasions have noticed such a dreary, vacant expression in his eyes, and that I might have suspected him of being addicted to the use of narcotics, had not the temperance and cleanliness of his whole life forbidden such a notion. As the weeks went by, my interest in him and my curiosity as to his aims in life gradually deepened and increased. His very person and appearance were such as to strike the attention of the most casual observer. In height he was rather over 6 feet, and so excessively learned that he seemed to be occasionally taller. His eyes were sharp and piercing, saving during those intervals of torpor to which I have alluded, and his thin, hawk-like nose gave his whole expression an air of alertness and decision. His chin, too, had the prominence and squareness which marked a man with determination. His hands were invariably blotted with ink, and stained with chemicals, yet he was possessed of extraordinary delicacy of touch, as I frequently had occasion to observe when I watched him manipulating his fragile philosophical instruments. The reader may set me down as a hopeless busybody, when I confess how much this man stimulated my curiosity, and how often I endeavored to break through the reluctance to which he showed on all that concerned himself. Before pronouncing judgment, however, we remembered how objectless was my lot, and how little there was to engage my attention. My health forbade me from venturing out unless the weather was exceptionally genial, and had no friends who would call upon me and break the monotony of my daily existence. Under these circumstances, I eagerly hailed the little mystery while hung around my companion, and spent much of my time in endeavoring to unravel. He was not studying medicine. He had himself, in reply to a question, confirmed Stanford's opinion upon the point. Neither did he appear to have pursued any course of reading which might fit him for a degree in science, or any other recognized portal which would give him into interest in the learned world. Yet his zeal for certain studies was remarkable and within eccentric limits to his knowledge, and was so extraordinarily ample and minute that this observation had fairly astounded me. Surely no man would work so hard or attain such precise information unless he had some definite end in view. Desultory readers are seldom remarkable for the exactness of learning. No man burdens his mind with small matters unless he has some good reason for doing so. His ignorance was as remarkable as his knowledge. Of contemporary literature, philosophy, and politics, he appeared to know next to nothing. Upon my quoting Thomas Carto, he inquired in the naviest way who he might be and what he had done. My surprise reached a climax. However, when I found incident that he was ignorant of the Copernican theory and the position of the solar system, that any civilized human being in this 19th century should not be aware of the Earth travel around the sun appeared to be such an extraordinary fact that I could hardly realize that. You appear to be astonished, he said, smiling an expression of surprise. Now that I do not know, I shall be the best to forget it. Forget it? You see, he explained, I consider that a man's brain originally is like a little empty attic, and you have to stock it with such furniture as you choose. A fool takes in all the lumber of every shell that comes across, so that the knowledge which might be useful to him gets crowded out, or at best is jumbled up with a lot of other things. So he is difficult in laying his hands upon it. Now the skillful workman is very careful indeed as to what it takes to hit his brain at it. He will have nothing but the tools which may help him in doing his work, but of these he has a large assortment of all the most perfect order. It is a mistake to think that that little room has elastic walls and can sustain it to an extent. Depend upon it, it comes a time when every addition of knowledge you forget something that you knew before. It is the highest importance, therefore, not to have useless facts elbowing out the useful ones. But the solar system, I protested. What the deuce is it to me? He interrupted impatiently. You say that we go around the sun. If we went around the moon, it would not make a penny worth of difference to me or my work. I was on the point of asking him what that work might be, but something in his manner showed me the question would not be unwelcome. I pondered over our short conversation, however, and endeavored to draw my deductions from it. He said that he would acquire no knowledge which did not bear upon his object. Therefore, all the knowledge which he possessed was such as it would be useful to him. I endeavored in my own mind, with all the various points upon which he had shown me in his own exceptionally well informed. I even took a pencil and jotted them down. I could not help smiling at the documents which I completed. It ran in this way. Sherlock Holmes, his limits. Number 1. Knowledge of literature, none. Philosophy, none. Astronomy, none. Politics, feeble. Botany, variable, well up in belladonna. Opium and poisons general. Nothing to particularly guard. Geology, practical but limited. Tells at a glance different soils from each other. After a walk has shown me splashes upon his trousers, and told me that by their color and consistent of what part of London he had received them. Chemistry, profound. Anatomy, accurate but unsystematic. Sensational literature, immense, he appears to know every detail and every horror portrayed in the century. Number 10. Plays the violin well. 11. Is an expert single-stick player, boxer, and swordsman. Number 12. Has a good practical knowledge of British law. When I had to go so far in my list, I threw it in the fire in despair. If I can only find what the fellow is driving I reconciled all these accomplishments and discovered a calling which needs them all, I said to myself, I may as well give up an attempt at one. I see that I have alluded above to his powers upon the violin. These were very remarkable, but eccentric as all of his accomplishments, that he could play pieces and difficult pieces. I knew well because at my request he would have played me some Meslan Lido and other favorites. When I left to himself, when when left to himself, however, he would seldom produce any music or attempt any recognized air. Leaning back in his armchair in the evening, he would close his eyes and scrape carelessly at the fiddle which was thrown across his knee. Sometimes the chords were sonorous and melancholy. Occasionally they were fantastic and cheerful. Clearly they reflected the thoughts which possessed him. But whether the music aided those thoughts, or whether the playing was simply the result of a whim or fancy, was more than I could determine. I might have rebelled against these exasperated solos, had it not been that he usually terminated them by playing a quick succession in whole series of my favorite airs as a slight compensation for the trial upon my patience. One moment. I'm gonna take a nice drink. Okay, let's continue. During the first week or so we had no callers. Had I begun to think that my companion was as friendless a man as I was myself. Presently, however, I found that he had many acquaintances, and those in the most different classes of society. There was one swallow, rat-faced, dark-eyed fellow who was introduced to me as Mr. Lestrade, who had came 3 or 4 times in a single week. One morning, a young girl called fashionably dressed and stayed for half an hour or more. The same afternoon brought a great-headed, seedy visitor, looking like a Jew peddler, who appeared to be in much excited, and who occasionally followed by a slipshod elderly woman. Or on another occasion, an old white-haired gentleman had an interview with my companion, and on another a railroad porter in his velveteen uniform. When any of these non-distant individuals put in an appearance, Sherlock Holmes used to beg for a use of the sitting room, and I would retire to my bedroom. He always apologized to me by putting up an inconvenience. I have to use this room as a place of business, he said, and these people are my clients. Again, I had the opportunity of asking him a point-blank question, and again my delicacy prevented me from forcing another man to confide in me. I imagined at the time that he had some strong reason for not alluding to it, but he soon dispelled the idea by coming round to the subject of his own accord. Wow, thank you for the blankie. Thank you, buddy. It was upon the 4th of March, as I have a good reason to remember, that I rose somewhat earlier than usual. I found that Sherlock Holmes had not yet finished his breakfast. The landlady had become so accustomed to my late habits that my place had not been laid nor my coffee prepared. With the unreasonable petulance of mankind, I rang the bell and gave a curt intimation that I was ready. Then I picked up a magazine from my table and attempted to while away from time with it, while my companion munched silently at his toast. One of the articles had a pencil mark at the heading, and naturally began to run my eye through it. Oh, you can night-night, Bunny. Have a nice sleep. Its somewhat ambitious title was The Book of Life, an attempt to show him how much observant man might learn by an accurate and systematic examination of all that came in his way. It struck me as being a remarkable mixture of shrewdness and absurdity. The reasoning was close and intense, but the dedication appeared to be far-fetched and exaggerated. The writer claimed, by a momentary expression, a twitch of his muscle and a glance of a nod, to fathom man's inmost thoughts. Deceit, according to him, was an impossibility in the case of one trained to observe and analyze. His conclusions were as infallible as so many propositions of elude. So startling would his result appear to be uninitiated and until they learned the process by which he had arrived at them, they might well consider him as a necromancer. From the drop of water, said the writer, a large young infer of the possibility of Atlantic or Nigerian without having seen or heard one or the other. So all life is a great chain, the nature of which is known whenever we are shown a single of it. Like all other arts, the science of deduction endless, is one of which can only be acquired by long and patient study, nor is life long enough to allow any more to attain the highest possibility of perfection. Before turning to those mortal mental aspects of the matter which present the greatest difficulties, let the inquiry begin by mastering more elementary problems. Let him, on meeting a fellow mortal, learn at a glance to distinguish the history of the man, and the trade or profession of which he belongs. Further as such was exercise may seem. It sharpens the faculties of observation, and teaches on one where to look and what to look for. By a man's fingernails, by his coat sleeve, by his boots, by his trousers, by the clutches of his forefingers and thumb, by his expression, by his shirt cuffs. By each of these things of a man's calling is plainly revealed that all united should fail to enlighten the competent inquirer in any case is almost inconceivable. What infernal twaddle! I cried, slapping the magazine down on the table. I never read such rubbish in my life. What is it? Asked Sherlock Holmes. Why, this article, I said, pointing at it with an egg spoon as I sat down to my breakfast. I see that you've read it since you have marked it. I don't deny that it's smartly written. It irritates me, though. It is simply the theory of some armchair launderer who involves all these neat little paradoxes in the seclusion of his own subject. It is not practical. I should like to see him clapped down in a third-class carriage, and on the underground ask him to give the trade to his fellow travelers. I will lay 1,000 to 1 against him. You would lose your money, Sherlock Holmes remarked calmly. As for the article, I wrote it myself. You? Yes. I have a turn both for observation and for deduction. The theories which I have expressed there, and which appear to you to be so chemically, are really extremely practical. So practical that I depend upon them for my bread and cheese. And how? I asked involuntarily. Well, I have a trade of my own, I suppose. I am the only one in the world. I'm a counseling detective, if you can understand what that is. Here in London, we have lots of government detectives and lots of private rooms. When these fellows are at fault, they come to me, and I manage to put them on the right scent. They lay all the evidence before me, and I'm generally able, by the help of my knowledge of the history of crime, to set them straight. There is a strong family resemblance about misdeeds, and if you have all the details of 1,000 at your finger ends, it is odd if you can't unravel the 1,000 first. Lestrade is a well-known detective. He got himself into the file recently over a forgery case, and that was what brought him here. And these other people? They're mostly sent on by private inquiry agencies. They're all people who are in trouble about something and want a little enlightenment. I listen to their story, they listen to my comments, and then I pocket my feet. What do you mean to say, I said, that without leaving your room you can unravel some knot which other men can make nothing of, although they have seen every detail for themselves? Quite so. I have a kind of intuition that way. Now and again a case turns up which is a little more complex. Then I had to bustle about and see things with my own eyes. You see, I have a lot of special knowledge which I apply to the problem, and which facilitates matters wonderfully. Those rules of deduction laid down in the article which aroused your scorn are invaluable to me in practical work. Observation with me is second nature. You appeared to be surprised when I told you, on our first meeting, that you had come from Afghanistan. You were told, no doubt. Nothing of the sort. I knew you came from Afghanistan. From long habit, that train of thoughts ran so swiftly through my mind that I arrived at the conclusion without being conscious of intermediate steps. There were such steps, however. The train of reasoning ran. Here is a gentleman of a medical type, but with the air of a military man. Clearly an army doctor. He has just come from the top ranks. From his face is stark, and that is not the natural tint of his skin, for the wrists are fair. He has undergone hardships and sickness, as his haggard face says clearly. His left arm was spin injured. He holds in a stiff and unnatural manner. Where in the tropics could an English army doctor have seen such hardship and got his arm wounded? Clearly in Afghanistan. The whole train of thought did not occupy a second. I then remarked that you came from Afghanistan, and you were astonished. It is simple. It is simple enough as you explain it, I said, smiling. You remind me of Edgar Allan Poe Dupin. I had no idea that such individuals did exist outside of stories. Sherlock Holmes rose and lit his pipe. No doubt you think that you are complimenting me with comparing me to Dupin, he observed. Not in my opinion. Dupin was a very inferior villain. That trick of his of breaking in on his friend's thoughts with the apropos remark after a quarter of an hour's silence is really very showy and superficial. He had some analytic genius, no doubt, but he was by no means such a phenomenon as Poe appeared to him. Have you read Cabrera's works? I asked. Does the quote come up to your idea of a detective? Sherlock Holmes sniffed sarcastically. Lecoq was a mere bungler, he said, in an angry voice. He had only one thing to recommend him, and that was his energy. That book made me positively ill. The question was how to identify an unknown prisoner. I could have done it in 24 hours. Lecoq took 6 months or so. It might have been made a textbook for detectives to teach them what to avoid. One moment, please. I'm going to pause really quick. Going to take another water. Okay, let's continue. I felt rather in danger of having two characters whom I admired treated in his caviar style. I walked over to the window and stood looking out on the busy street. This fellow may be very clever, I said to myself, but he's certainly very conceited. There are no crimes and no criminals in these days, he said, notoriously. What is the use of having brains in our professions? I know well that I have it in me to make my name famous. No man lives or has ever lived who has brought the same amount of study and natural talent to the detection of crime, which I have done. And what is the result? There is no crime to detect, or at most some bungling villainy with a motive so transparent that even a Scotland Yard official can't see through it. I was so annoyed at this bumptious style of conversation, I thought it best to change the topic. I wonder what that fellow is looking for, I asked, pointing at the starboard plainly dressed individual who was walking slowly down the other side of the street, looking anxious at the number. He had a large blue envelope in his hand, and was indeed the bearer of a message. You mean the retired sergeant of Marines? Said Sherlock Holmes. Brag and bounce? Thought to myself. He knows that I cannot verify his guess. The thought had hardly passed through my mind when the man whom we were watching caught sight of the number on our door and ran rapidly across the roadway. We heard a loud knock, a deep voice below, and heavy steps ascending to the stairs. For Sherlock Holmes, he said, stepping into the room and handing my friend a letter. Here was an opportunity of taking the conceit out of him. He little thought of this when he made the random shot. May I ask, my lad, I said in a blandest voice, what your trade may be? Commissioner, sir, he said gruffly. You're for away for repairs. And you were, I asked with a slightly malicious glance at my companion. A sergeant, sir. Royal Marine, Light Infantry, sir. No answer, right, sir? He clicked his heels together and raised his hand in salute and was gone. Chapter 2 End. Ah! Nope, give it a moment, everyone. It's loading. Okay. What the heck? Let's take a third sip. Delicious, everyone. Delicious. Okay. Alright. Hope everyone's getting cozy. Or I hope you're asleep now. Okay. Chapter 3. The Larson Garden Mystery. I confess I was considered startled by this fresh proof of the practical nature of my companion's theories. My respect for his powers of analyst increased wondrously. There still remained some lurking suspicion in my mind, however, that the whole thing was a prearranged episode. It did dazzle me, though what earthly object he could have in taking me, and it was past my comprehension. When I looked at him, he had finished reading the note, and his eyes had assumed the vacant, lackluster expression which showed mental abstraction. "How in the world did you deduce that?" I asked. "Deduce what?" he said perturbingly. "Why, he was a retired sergeant of Marines." "I have no time for trifles," he answered brusquely, and then with a smile. "Excuse my rudeness. You broke the thread of my thoughts. Perhaps it was Oswell. So you actually were not able to see that the man was the sergeant of Marines?" "No, indeed." "It was easier to know it than to explain why I knew it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. Even across the street I could see a great blue anchor tattooed on the back of the fellow's hand. That smacked of the sea. He had a military carriage. However, the regulation side whiskers. There we have the Marine. He was a man with some amount of self-report and a certain air of command. You must observe the way in which he held his head and swung his cane. A steady, respectable, middle-aged man, too, on the face of him. Of all facts which led me to believe he had been a sergeant." "Wonderful!" I ejaculated. "Commonplace," said Holmes, though I thought of the expression that he was pleased I might have been surprised and admiration. "I said just now that there were no criminals. It appears that I am wrong. Look at this." He threw me over the note, which he commissionary had brought. 7. "Why," I cried as I cast my eyes over it, "this is terrible." "It does seem to be a little out of our common," he remarked calmly. "Would you mind reading it to me out loud?" This is a letter which I read to him. "My dear Sherlock Holmes, there has been a bad business doing..." Let's read the voice. Let's read this different. My dear, my dear Sherlock Holmes, there has been a bad business during the night at 3, Lawson Gardens of the Brixton Road. Our man is to beat sea at light there about 2 in the morning, and as the house was an empty one, suspected that something was amiss. He found the door open, and in the front room, which is bare of furniture, discovered the body of a gentleman, well dressed and having cards in his pocket bearing the name of Enoch J. Drevler, Cleveland, Ohio, USA. There had been no robbery, nor is there any evidence as to how the man met his death. There are marks of blood in the room, but there is no wound upon this person. We are at a loss as to how he came to an empty house. Indeed, the whole affair is a puzzler. If you can come around at the house any time before 12, you will find me there. I have left everything in status quo until I hear from you. If you are unable to come, I shall give you fuller details, and would esteem it a great kindness if you could favor me with your opinion. Yours faithfully, Tobias Gregson. Gregson is the smartest of Scotland Yarders, my friend remarked. He and Lestrade are a pick of a bad lot. They are both quick and energetic, but conventionally, shockingly so. They have their knives into one another, too. They are so just as the pair of professional beauties. There will be some fun over this case, if they are both put upon the scent. I was amazed at the calm in which he rippled on. Surely there is not a moment to be lost, I cried. Shall I go and order you a cab? I'm not sure about whether I shall go. I am the most incurable lazy devil that ever stood in the shoe leather. That is, when the fit is on me, therefore I can be spry enough at times. Why, it is such a chance as you have been longing for. My dear fellow, what does it matter to me? Supposing I ravel the whole matter, you may be sure that Gregson, Lestrade, and Co. will pocket all the credit. That counts for being an unofficial personage. But he begs you to help. Yes, he knows that I am his superior, and not acknowledges it to me. But he would cut his tongue out before he would own it to by any third person. However, we may as well go and have a look. I shall work it out on my own hook. I may have a laugh at them if I have nothing else. Come on. He hustled on his overcoat and bustled about in a way that showed that his energetic fit had superseded the pathetic. Get your hat, he said. You wish for me to come? Yes, if you have nothing better to do. A minute later, we were both in hansom, driving furiously up the Brixton Road. It was foggy, cloudy morning, and a dun-colored veil hung over the housetops, looking like the reflection of the mud-colored streets beneath. My companion was in the best of spirits, and prattled away about Cremona fiddles, and the difference between the Stradivarius and the Amati. As for myself, I was silent, for the dull weather and the melancholy business upon which we were engaged depressed my spirits. You don't seem to give much thought to the matter in hand, I said at last, interrupting Holmes' musical disquisition. No data yet, he answered. It is a capital mistake to theorize before you have all the evidence. It biases the judgment. You will have your data soon, I remarked, pointing with my finger. This is the Brixton Road, and then that house, if I'm not very much mistaken. So it is. Stop! Driver, stop! We were still 100 yards or so from it, but he insisted upon our alighting, and we finished our journey upon foot. Number 3 Lawston Garden wore an ill-omened and miniature look. It was one of the four which stood back some little from the streets, two being a company and two empty. The latter looked like they were three tiers to vacant melancholy windows, which were blank and dreary save the here and there to a let car that developed a cataract of the bleared panes. A small garden sprinkled over the scattered eruption of sickly plants separated from each of these houses from the street, and was traversed by a narrow pathway, yellowish in color, and consisted apparently of a mixture of clay and gravel. The whole place was very sloppy from the rain which had fallen through the night. The garden was bounded by the 3-foot brick wall with the fringe of wood trails upon the top, and against this wall was leaning a stalwart police constable, surrounded by a small knot of loafers, who craned their necks and strained their eyes in the vein of hoping to catch in some glimpse of the proceedings within. I had imagined that Sherlock Holmes would at once have hurried into the house and plunged in the study of the mystery. Nothing appeared to be further from his intentions, with the air of nonchalance which, under the circumstances, seems to be border upon affectation. He lounged up and down the pavement, gazed vacantly on the ground, the sky, the opposite houses, and the line of railings. Having finished his scrutiny, he proceeded slowly down the path, or rather down the fringe of grass, which flanked the path, keeping his eyes riveted upon the ground. Twice he stopped, and once I saw him smile. He heard him utter an exclamation of satisfaction. There were many marks of footsteps upon the wet clay soil, but since the police had been coming and going over it, I was unable to see how my companion could hope to learn anything from it. Still, I had such extraordinary evidence of my quickness and his perceptive facilities that I had no doubt he could see a great deal which was hidden from me. At the door of the house, we were met by a tall, white-faced, flaxen-haired man with a notebook in his hand, who rushed forward and wrung my companion's hand with effusiveness. "It is indeed kind of you to come," he said. "I have everything left untouched." Except that," my friend answered, pointing at the pathway. "If I heard of buffaloes had passed along there, it could not be the greater mess. No doubt, however, you had drawn your own conclusions. Gregson before you permitted this. I have I have had so I have had so much to go inside the house, the detective said evasively. By calling. Dr. Lestrade is here. I have relied upon him to look after this. Holmes glanced at me and raised his eyebrows, and sardonically, with two such men as yourself and Lestrade upon the ground, there will not be much of a third party to find out, he said. Gregson rubbed his hands in a self-satisfied way. I think we have done all that we can be done, he answered. It's a weird case, though, and I knew your taste for such things. You did not come here in a cab? Asked Sherlock Holmes. No, sir. Not Lestrade? No, sir. Then let us go and look at the room. With which consequently remarked he strode into the house, followed by Gregson, whose features expressed his astonishment. A short patched, spare plank, and dusty, led the kitchen and offices. Two doors opened out of it and left to the right. One of these had obviously been closed for many weeks. The other belonged to the dining room, which was the department in which the mystery affair had occurred. Holmes walked in, and I followed him with a subdued feeling of which was the presence of death inspires. It was a large square room, looking at all large in the absence of all furniture. A vulgar flame paper adorned the walls, but it was blotched in place of which mildew and here and there were great strides had become detached and hung down, exposing a little yellow plaster beneath. Opposite the door was a showy fireplace, surmounted by a mantelpiece, an imitation of white marble. On one corner of this was struck the stump of a red wax candle. The solitary window was so dirty that the light was hazy and uncertain, giving the dull gray tinge to everything, which was intensified by the thick layer of dust which coated the whole apartment. All these details observed afterwards. At present, my attention was centered upon the single grim, motionless figure which lay stretched upon the boards, with vacant, sightless eyes stared at the discolored ceiling. It was that the man about 43 or 44 years of age, middle-sized, broad-shouldered, with crisp-curling black hair and a short, stubbly beard. He was dressed in a heavy broadcloth frock coat and waistcoat, with light-colored trousers, immaculate collar and cuffs, and a top hat, which, fresh and trim, was placed upon the floor beside him. His hands were clenched and his arms thrown abroad, while his lower limbs were interlocked, as though his death struggle had been a grievous one. On his rigid face was still an expression of horror, and it seemed to be of hatred, such as I have never seen upon human features. This malignant and terrible contortion, combined with a low forehead, blunt nose, and prognostic jaw, gave him a dead man of singular sameness and ape-like appearance, which was increased by his withering, unnatural posture. I have seen death in many forms, but never as it appeared to me in any more fearsome aspect than in the dark, grimy apartment, which looked upon one of the main arteries of suburban London. Lestrade, lean and bird-like as ever, was standing by the doorway and greeted my companion and myself. "This case will make a stir, sir," he remarked. "It beats anything I have seen, and I am no chicken." "There is no clue?" said Gregson. "Not at all," chimed in Lestrade. Sherlock Holmes approached the body and, kneeling down, examined it intently. "You are sure that there is no wound?" he asked, pointing to numerous spots and splotches of blood which lay all around. "Positive!" both detectives cried. "Then, of course, this blood belongs to the second individual. 8, presumably, the murderer. If murder had been committed, it reminds me of the circumstance attendant of the death of Von Johnson in Uruch in the year 34. Do you remember the case, Gregson?" "No, sir." "Read it up. You really should. There's nothing new under the sun. It has all been done before." As he spoke, his nimble fingers were flying here, there, and everywhere, feeling, pressing, and budging, examining, while his eyes wore the same far-away expression which I had already remarked upon. So swiftly was the examination made that one would hardly have guessed the minuteness of which I had concluded. Finally he sniffed the dead man's lips, and then glanced at the sole of his patient's leather boots. He was not been moved at all? Yes. No more than necessary for the purpose of the examination. You can take him to the mortuary now, he said. There's nothing more to be learned. Gregson had a stretcher and 4 men at hand. At his call, they entered the room, and a stranger was lifted and carried out. As they raised him, a ring tinkled down and rolled across the floor. Lestrade grabbed it up and stared at it with mystified eyes. There's been a woman here. Wait. There's been a woman here, he cried. It's a woman's wedding ring. He held it out as he spoke. Upon the palm of his hand, we all gathered around him and gazed at it. There could be no doubt that the circular plain gold one had once adorned the finger of a bride. This complicates matters, said Gregson. Heavens knows they were complicated enough before. You sure it doesn't simplify them? Observed Holmes. There's nothing to be learned by staring at it. What did you find in his pockets? We have it all here, said Gregson, pointing to a litter of objects upon one of the bottom steps of the stairs. A gold watch, number 97163, by Bedford of London. Gold Albert chain, very heavy and solid. Wow, thank you for the raid, Mimi. Welcome, Raiders. We're just doing a solo reading stream, but I'll give everyone a quick yokai hi-hi. One yokai hi-hi. My name is Luca. I'm a Sugami. My partner in crime is, oh, you know what? I just realized. I do not have, here with me. But she is a Kitty Crow Tengu. We are dual streamers, and we stream almost every day, except for today. Usually we would be doing a dual reading stream, but currently, since this is part of the goals of our 24-hour subathon, I'm doing a solo reading stream by myself. So I hope you can all enjoy. Oh, and we are Yokai Playtime. Thank you for coming. If you need to leave, go ahead and leave. You know, you don't have to stay if you don't want to. It is, well, it's a good story. So if you like just listening and listen to the rain, like by my own scenes, but otherwise, you are not obliged to stay. Okay. After that introduction, let's go ahead and get started. Let's continue. Gold armor chain was heavy and soft. Gold ring with puzzling device. Gold pen, bulldog's head, with rubies as eyes. Russian leather card case with cards of a Dodge J. Gibber of Cleveland, corresponding with the EJD Apollo London. No purse but loose money to the extent of £7.13. Pocket edition of Brokenless Decarium with the name of Joseph Stangerson upon a flyleaf. 2 letters, one addressed to E.J. Trebler and one to Joseph Stangerson. At what address? American Exchange, stranded, to the left till called for. They are both from the Guardian Steamship Company, and refer to the sailing of the boats from Liverpool. It is clear that this unfortunate man was about to return and do work. Have you made any inquiries to this man, Stangerson? I did at once, sir, said Gregson. I had advised sent to all the newspapers, and one of my men has gone to the American Exchange, but he has not yet returned yet. Have you sent to Cleveland? We telegraphed them this morning. How did you word your inquiries? We simply detailed the circumstances and said that we should be glad of any information would come to help us. You did not ask for particulars on the point of which appeared to be to you crucial? I asked for Stangerson. Nothing else? Oh, I'm reading Sherlock Holmes. A study in Scarlet. We're currently in chapter 3. Oh, and thank you, Keo, for the shout out. I hope you enjoyed Final Fantasy. I asked for Stangerson. Nothing else? Is there no circumstance in which the whole case appears to hinge? Will you not telegraph that again? I've said all I have to say, said Gregson in an offended voice. Sherlock Holmes chuckled to himself and appeared to be about to make some remark when Lestrade, who had been in the front room while we were holding this conversation in the hall, reappeared upon the scene, rubbing his hands in a pomp and self-satisfied manner. "Mr. Gregson," he said, "I have just made a discovery of the highest importance, one of which would have been overlooked had I not made a careful examination of the walls." The little man's eyes sparkled as he spoke, and he was evidently in a state of suppressed exclamation at which scored the point against his colleague. "Come here," he said, bustling back to the room, the atmosphere of which felt clearer since the removal of ghastly inmates. "Now stand there." He struck a match at his boot and held it up against the wall. "Look at that," he said triumphantly. I have remarked that the paper had fallen away in this part. In this particular corner of the room, a large piece had peeled off, leaving a yellow square of porous plaster. Across the bare space there was scrawled in blood-red letters in a single word: "Rotch." "What do you think of that?" cried the detective, with an air of showman exhibiting the show. "This was overlooked because it was the darkest corner of the room, and no one thought of looking there. The murderer was written with his hit, and with his and her own blood. Seeing the smear, there was somehow trickled down the wall. That disposed of the idea of suicide, anyhow. Why was that the corner chosen to write it on? I will tell you. See the candle on the mantelpiece? It was lit at the time, and if it was lit, this corner would have been the brightest instead of the darkest portion of the wall." "And what does it mean to have now that you found it?" asked Gregson in a deep-percent voice. "Mean? Why, it means that the writer was going to put the female name, Rachel, but was disturbed by before he or she had time to finish. You mark my words. When the case comes to be cleared, you will find that a woman named Rachel was something to do with it. It's all very well for you to laugh, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. You may be very smart and clever, but the old hound is the best when all is said and done." "I really beg your pardon," said my companion, who had ruffled the little man's temper by bursting into an explosion of laughter. "You certainly have the credit of being the first of us to find this out, and as you say, bears every mark of having been written by my other participants. At last, night's mystery. I have not had time to examine this room yet, but with your permission, I shall do so now. Oh, one moment. I don't hear sounds. Give it a moment, everyone." There we go. How am I supposed to read without my ring? Nope, let me just take another quick hydrate really quick. I still have Sigma, then Alpha, then I can finally do the MSQ again. Oh, okay, cool. Okay. As he spoke, he whipped a tape measure, the large round magnifying glass, from his pocket. With these two implements, he trod noisily about the room, sometimes stopping, occasionally kneeling, and once laying flat upon his face. So engrossed was he with his occupation that he appeared to have forgotten our presence, for he chattered away to himself under his breath this whole time, keeping up a running fire of examinations, groans, whistles, and little cries of encouragement and of hope. As I watched him, I was irresistibly reminded of a pure-blooded, well-trained foxhound, as it dashes backwards and forwards through the covert, whining in eagerness until it comes across the lost scent. For 20 minutes or more he continued his researches, measuring with the most exact care the distance between marks which have entirely visible to me, and occasionally applying his tape to the walls in an equally incomprehensible manner. In one place he gathered up a very carefully little pile of gray dust from the floor, then packed it away in an envelope. Finally he examined with his glass the word upon the wall, going over every letter of it with the most minute exactness. This done, he appeared to be satisfied, for he replaced his tape and his glasses in his pocket. They say the genius has an infinite capacity for taking pains, he remarked with a smile. It's a very bad definition, but it does apply to detective work. Gregson and Lestrade had watched the maneuvers 9 of the amateur companion with a considerable curiosity and some contempt. They had really failed to appreciate the fact, which had begun to realize that Sherlock Holmes' smallest actions were all directed towards some definite and practical end. What do you think of it, sir? They both asked. It will appear that robbing you of the credit for the case if I was to presume to help you, remarked my friend. You are doing so well now that it will be a pity for anyone to interfere. There was a world of sarcasm in his voice as he spoke. If you will let me know of your investigations, go, he continued. I should be happy to give you any help I can. In the meantime, I should like to speak with the constable who found the body. Can you give me his name and address? Lestrade glanced at his notebook. John Rance, he said. He's at off duty now. You will find him at 46 Audley Court, Kennington Park Gate. Holmes took a note of the address. Come along, doctor, he said. We should go and look him up. I'll tell you one thing which may help you in this case, he continued, turning to the two detectives. There has been one murder done, and the murderer was a small man. He was more than 6 feet high. He was in the prime of his life, had small feet for his height, wore coarse, square-toed boots, and a smoked tri-pipe cigar. He came here with the victim in a four-wheel cab, which was drawn by a horse with 3 old shoes, and one new and one on his fore-off leg. In all probability, the murderer had a florid face, with the fingernails at his right hand with remarkable long. These are the only indications, but they may assist you. Lestrade and Gregson glanced at each other with gloomy smiles. If this man was the murderer, how was it done? Asked the foreman. Poison, said Sherlock Holmes curtly and short on. One other thing, Lestrade, he added, turning around at the door. Rush! It's a German for revenge, so don't lose your time looking for Miss Rachel. With which parchment shot he walked away, leaving the two rivals open-mouthed behind him. End of chapter 3. Well, this is pretty good. Alright. Before I begin chapter 4, let's go ahead and take another drink. Okay. Let's begin chapter 4. Chapter 4 is What John Rance Had to Tell. It was 1 o'clock when we left number 3 Lost Sherlock Gardens. Sherlock Holmes led me to the nearest telegraph office, whence he dispatched a long telegram. Then he hailed a cab and ordered the driver to take us to the address given us to Lestrade. There is nothing like first-hand evidence, he remarked. As a matter of fact, my mind was only made up upon the case, but still we may as well learn all that is to be learned. You amaze me, Holmes, said I. Surely you are not so sure as to pretend to be the most particular which you gave. There's no room for mistake, he answered. The very first thing which I observed on arriving there was the cab that made 2 ruts with it, wheels close to the curb. Now, up to last night, we have made no rain for a week, so that those wheels which left such a deep impression must have been there during the night. There were the marks of the horse hoofs, too, the outline of which was far more clearly cut than that of the other 3, showing that this was a new shoe. Since the cab was there after the rain began, it was not there at any time during the morning. I have Gregson's word for that. It follows that it must have been there during the night, and therefore it was brought those 2 individuals to the house. That seems simple enough, said I. But how about the other man's height? Why, the height of a man, in 9 cases out of 10, can be told from the length of his stride. It is simple calculations enough, though there is no use of my boring you with figures. I had this fellow stride both on the play outside and on the desk within. Then I had in a way of checking my calculations. When a man writes on a wall, his instinct leads him to write about the level of his own eyes. Now that ring on is just over 6 feet from the ground. It was child's play. And his age? I asked. Well, if it's a man can stride 4.5 feet without the smallest effort, he can't be quite the sea of yellow. That was breadth and a puddle of the garden wall, which he had readily walked across. Patent leather boots had gone around, and square toes had hopped over it. There's no mystery about it at all. I'm simply applying to ordinary life a few of those precepts of observation and deduction, which I advocated in the article. Is there anything else that puzzles you? The fingernails and the trichoglyph, I suggested. The writing on the wall was done with a man's forefinger, dripped in blood. My glass allowed me to observe the plaster was slightly scratched in doing it, which would have not been the case if the man's nail had been trimmed. I gathered up some scattered ashes on the floor. It was dark-colored and flaky, such as the ashes only been by tripoli. I have made a special study of cigar ashes. In fact, I have written a monograph about the subject. I flatter myself that I can distinguish at a glance the ash of any known brand, either cigar or tobacco. It is just in such detail that the skill of detective differs from the Gregson or the straw type. And the fluoride face? I asked. Ah, that was a more daring shot, though. I have no doubt that I was right. You may not ask me at the present state of the affair. I passed my hand over my brow. My head is the whirl, I remarked. The more one thinks of it as the more mystery as it grows. How come these two men, if they were two men, entered an empty house? What has become of the cabman who drove them? How could one man compel another to take poison? Where did the blood come from? What is the object of the murder, since robbery had no part of it? How come the woman's ring there? Above all, why should the second man write up the German word Reich before decamping? I confess that I could not see any possible of reconciling of these facts. My companion smiled approvingly. You sum up the difficult situation secondly and well, he said. There is much that is still obscure, though I have quite made up my mind of the main facts. As the poor Lestrade discovery, it was simply a blind intended to put the police upon the wrong track, by suggesting socialism and secret societies. It was not done by a German. The A, if you notice, was printed somewhat after the German fashion. Now a real German inevitably prints with a Latin character, so that we may safely say that this was not written by one, but by a clumsy imitator who overdid his part. It was simply a ruse to divert inquiry of the wrong channel. I'm not going to tell you much more than this case, Doctor. You know the controversy gets no credit when no one gets to explain this trick, and if I show you too much of my method of working, you will come to the conclusion that I am a very ordinary individual after all. I should never do that, I answered. You have brought detection as near as exact science as ever will be brought to this world. My companion flushed upon with pleasures of my words, and the earnest way in which I uttered them. I have already observed that this is sensitive to flattery. The score of this art was any girl could be of her beauty. I'll tell you one other thing, he said. Patent leather, tan, and square toes came in the same cab, and they walked down the pathway together, as friendly as possible, arm in arm. In all probability, when they got inside, they walked up and down the room, or rather, patent leathers stood still, while square toes walked up and down. I could read all the dust, and I could read that as he walked, he grew more and more excited. That is shown by the increased length of his strides. He was thinking all the while and working himself up, no doubt in a hurry. Then the tragedy occurred. I told you all that I know myself now, for the rest is mere surmise and conjectures. We have a good working basis, however, on which to start. We must hurry up, and for I want to go to Hall's concert to hear Norman Durwald this afternoon. This conversation had occurred while the cab had been threading its way through a long succession of dingy streets and dreary byways. In the dingiest and dreariest, the driver suddenly came and stood still. "Is that the Otley Court there?" he said, pointing to a narrow slit of a line of dead-colored brick. "You'll find me here when you come back." Otley Court was not an attractive locality. The narrow passage led us to the quadrangle paved with flags and lined with sordid dwellings. We picked our way among the groups of dirty children. and through the lines of discolored linen until we came to number 46, the door of which was decorated with a simple slip of brass on which the name Rance was engraved. On inquiry, we found that the constable was in bed. We were shown in the little front parlor to await his coming. He appeared presently looking a little irritable at his being disturbed of those slumbers. "I made my report at the office," he said. Holmes took a half-sovereign from his pocket and played with it pensively. "We thought that you should like to hear from your own lips," he said. "I should be most happy to tell you anything I ask," a considerable answer upon his eyes with a little golden disc. "Just let us hear it on your own way," answered Kirk. Rance sat down at his horsehair sofa and knitted his brow as though determined not to omit anything in the narrative. "I'll tell you from the beginning," he said. "My time is from 10:09 to 6 in the morning. At 11 there was a fight with the White Hart. But bar that was quiet enough at the beat. At 1 o'clock it began to rain, and I met Harry Mulcher, him who was a Holland Grove beat, and we stood together at the corner of Henry Street or talking. Presently, maybe about 2 or a little after, I thought it would take around. I thought I would take a look around and see that it was all right down the Brixton Road. It was preciously dirty and lonely. Not so did not meet me all the way down, though the cab or two would pass me by. I was strolling down, thinking between ourselves not how uncommonly kind a foreign gin hot would be, when suddenly the glint of a light caught my eye in the window of the same house. Now I knew that the two houses were Lorsten Gardens was empty on the account of that it was owned them with who won't have the drains this evening. Though the very last tenant, one of them died of a typhoid fever. I was knocked out in a heap, therefore, at seeing the light at the window, and I suspected that something was wrong. And when I got to the door, you stopped, and then walked back to the garden gate," my companion interrupted. What did you do that for?" Rance gave a violent jump and stared at Sherlock Holmes with the utmost amazement upon his features. "Why, that's true, sir," he said. "Though how can you come know it? Heaven only knows. You see, when I got up to the door, it was so still and so lonesome that I thought I'd be none the worse for someone with me. And I ain't feared of anything this side of the grave. But I thought that maybe if it was him that died of the typhoid inspecting the drains, what killed him. The thought gave me a kind of turn, and I walked back to the gate to see if I could see Murcher's lantern. But there wasn't no sign of him nor of anyone else." "There was no one in the street?" "Not a living soul, sir. Not as much as a dog." Then I pulled myself together and went back and pushed the door open. All was quiet inside, so I went into the room where the light was burning. There was a candle flickering in the mantelpiece, a red wax one, and by its light I saw. "Yes, I know that what you saw. You walked round the room several times, and you knelt down the body, and then you walked through and tried the kitchen door, and then—" John Rand sprang to his feet with a frightened face and suspicion in his eyes. "Where was you hid? Where was you hid? Did see that?" he cried. "It seems to me that you know it deals more than you should." Okay. One moment, please. I will now take another drink. That will leave me okay. Holmes laughed and threw his card across the table to the constable. Don't get arresting me for the murder," he said. "I am one of the hounds and not the wolf. Mr. Rexton or Mr. Lashar will answer for that. Go on, though. What did you do next?" Rance resumed his seat without having lost his mystified expression. "I went back to the gate and sounded my whistle. We brought Murcher or two more to the spot." "Was the street empty then?" "Well, it was, as far as anybody that could be of any good goes." "What do you mean?" The constable features brought into their grin. "I've seen many a drunk chappin in my time," he said, "but never anyone so crying drunk as that the Pope.
He was at the gate when I came out, and leaning up aging the rail, and is singing at the pitch of his lungs with Cumberland's newfangled banner, or some such stuff. He couldn't stand for less help.
What sort of man was he? Asked Sherlock Holmes.
John Rance appeared to be somewhat irritable at his discretion. He was an uncommon drunk sort of man, he said. He'd have to have found himself in a station if he hadn't been so took up.
His face, his dress, didn't you notice them? Holmes broke into an impatient. He broke in impatiently.
I should think I did not notice them, seeing that I had to prop him up. Me and Merchant between us, he was a long chap with a red face, the lower part muffled round.
That will do, cried Holmes. What became of him?
We had enough to do without looking after him, the policeman said, in an irritated voice.
I'll wager he found himself all the way home. Wait. Oh, my bad.
We had enough to do without looking after him, the policeman said in an infuriated voice. I'll wager he found his way in his white robe.
How was he dressed?
A brown coat.
Had he a whip in his hand?
A whip? No.
He must have left it behind, much like my companion. You didn't happen to see or hear a cab after that?
No.
There is a half sovereign for you, my companion said, standing up and taking his hat. I'm afraid, Rance, that you will never rise in the force. That hat of yours should be used for ornament. You might have gained your sergeant's stripes last night. The man whom you held in your hand is the man who holds a clue to his mystery. And what we are seeking, there was no use arguing about it now. I'll tell you that is so. Come along, Doctor. We started off with the cab together, leaving the orphan and creditors, but obviously uncomfortable. That blithering fool, Holmes said bitterly as he drove back to our lodgings. Just to think of us having an incomparable bit of good luck, and now taking advantage of it. I'm rather in the dark still. It is true that the description of this man tallies with your idea of the second party of this mystery. But why should he come back to the house after leaving it? That is not the way of criminals. The ring, man, the ring! This is what he came for. If we have no other way of catching him, he can always bait our line with this ring. I shall have him, Doctor. I'll lay you 2-to-1 that I have him. I must thank you for all of it. I might not have gone but for you. And so you have missed the finest study I have come across. A study in scarlet, eh? Why shouldn't we use the little art jargon? There's a scarlet thread of murder running through the portless saint of flight, with the duty of a unravel and isolate it, and expose every inch of it, and not for much. And then for Nora Newrock. Her attack was her brown are splendid. This little thing of Chopin's, she plays in so magnificently. Tra-la-la-la-la. Leaning back at the cab, was amateur blood for carol away like a lark, while I meditated upon the mystery of many-sidedness of the human mind. Chapter 4 and well, I held check. Alright, we're gonna go to the next chapter. I'm gonna go ahead and fill my water. Oh, thank you for the hat pack, Keo. How you enjoyed the story so far? Oh, I finished the first water bottle, everyone. Alright, take a sip. You know what, everyone? I think I am gonna take a sip. Might as well get up while I do my stretches. Give me about 1 minute and I'll be back. I'll leave myself here just, while I read the next chapter by myself really quick. Not really. 1 moment, please. 1 moment. Be right back. I'm back. Sorry about that. Anyways, I got a snack, got my water, I stretched, did posture check, and thank you for coming, user. You okay? Hi, hi. Yes, we actually did disable sound alerts just for specifically for our solo stream readings. Kyo, if you're here, please, please, refund users points. It's okay. You didn't know that. In fact, we don't do this very often, so it's okay if you missed it. It's all good. It's all good. Don't worry, user. We'll get you your points back. Okay. Let's continue, everyone. We are now on chapter 5. Our advertisement brings a visitor. Our morning exertions have been too much for my weak health, and I was tired out in the afternoon. Oh. Bakamate, arario, no tarado. Mikerara, Sudusa, Tsuki, Monika, Dorinabe, Dorita, Sono Pera. I don't know how the song goes, but this is the best. Offer you now. Da 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 da. There you go, user. Your own personal Bakumitai. Oh man, I just butchered it. We'll play it for you next stream. Okay. Anyways. Back on track, everyone. Our morning exertions have been too much for my weak health, and I was tired out in the afternoon. After Holmes' departure at the concert, I laid down upon the sofa and endeavored to get a couple of hours of sleep. I was a useless attempt. My mind had been too much excited by all that had occurred, and the strange fancies surmised crowded into it. Every time that I closed my eyes, I saw before me the sort of baboon-like countenance of the murdered man. So sinister was the impression that it had faced to produce upon me that I found it difficult to feel anything but gratitude for him who had removed of its own owner of the world. If ever human features bespoke vice of the most manly types, they were certainly those of Enoch J. Drebber of Cleveland. Still, I recognized that justice must be done, and that the depravity of the victim was no condiment, leaven in the eyes of the law. Well, thank you, thank you. The more I thought of it, the more extraordinary did the occurrence. But I thought that the man had been poisoned appeared. I remembered how he had sniffed his lip. I had no doubt that he had detected something which had given rise to the idea. Then again, if not poison, what had caused the man's death, since there was neither wound nor marks of strangulation? But, on the other hand, whose blood was on which lay so thickly upon the floor? There was no signs of a struggle, nor had a victim of any weapon with which he might have wounded the antagonist. As long as those questions were unsolved, I felt the sleep would be no easy matter. Either Holmes or myself, with his quiet, self-confident manner, convinced me that he had already formed a theory which explained all the facts, though what it was I could not, for an instant, conjure. He was very late in returning, so late that I knew that the concert could not have detained him all the time. Dinner was on the table before he appeared. It was magnificent, he said as he took his seat. Do you remember what Darwin says about music? He claims that the power of producing and appreciating it existed among the human race long before the power of speech was arrived. Perhaps that is why we are also subtly influenced by it. There are vague memories in our souls of those misty centuries when the world was in childhood. That's a rather broad idea, I remarked. One ideas must be broad of nature as they are to interpret nature, he answered. What's the matter? You're not looking quite yourself. This Brixton Road affairs has upset you? To tell you the truth, it has, I said. I ought to be more case-hearted after my advocate experiences.
I saw my own comrades hacked to pieces at my one without losing my nerve. I can understand. There is no mystery about which stimulates the imagination. Were there no imagination, there is no horror. Have you ever seen the evening paper? No. It gives a fairly good account of the affair. It does not mention the fact that when a man was raised up, a woman's wedding ring fell upon the floor. It was just as well as it's not. Why? Look at the advertisement, he answered. I have one sent to every paper this morning, immediately after the affair. He threw the paper across to me, and I glanced at the place indicated. It was the most announcement in the found column. In Brixton Road, this morning, it read, a plain gold wedding ring, found on the roadway between the White Hart Tavern and the Holland Grove. Apply Dr. Watson, 221B, Baker Street, between 8 and 9 this evening. Excuse my using your name, he said. If I use my own, some of these dunderheads will recognize it, and I want to meddle in the affair. That is all right, I answered. But supposing anyone applies, I have no ring. Ah, yes, you have, said he, handing me one. This will do very well. It is almost a vestment. And who do you expect will answer the advertisement? Why, the man in the brown coat. Our fluoride friend, who with square toes. If he does not come to himself, he will send an accomplice. Would you not consider it too dangerous? Not at all. If my view of the case is correct, then I have every reason to believe that this is the man. This man would rather risk anything than lose the ring. According to the notion, he dropped it while stooping over Drebber's body, and did not miss it any time. After the house, he discovered his loss and hurried back, but found the police already in possession. Owing to his own folly of leaving the candle burning, he had to pretend to be drunk in order to allay the suspicion which might have been aroused by his appearance at the gate. Not putting yourself in the man's place, on thinking the matter over, it must have been occurred to him that it was possible that he had lost the ring in the road after leaving the house. What would he do then? He would eagerly look for the evening papers in the hope of seeing it among the articles found. His eyes, of course, were lit up upon this. He would be overjoyed. Why should he fear a trap? There would be no reason for his eyes why finding the ring should be connected with the murder. He will come, he will come. You shall see him within an hour. And then? I asked. Oh, you can leave me to deal with him then. Have you any arms? I have my old service revolver and a few cartridges. You had better clean it and load it. He will be a desperate man, and though I shall take him unawares, it is well to be ready for anything. I went to my bedroom and followed his advice. When I returned with the pistol, the table had been cleared. That Holmes was engaged in his favorite occupation, and strapped it upon his Bible. The plot thickens, he said as I entered. I just have to answer my American telegram. My view of the case is the correct one. And that is? I asked eagerly. My fate will be the better of new strings, he remarked. Put your pistol in your pocket. When the fellow comes, speak to him in ordinary way. Leave the rest to me. Don't frighten him by looking at him too hard. It is 8 o'clock now, I said, glancing up at my watch. Yes, he will probably be here in a few minutes. Open the door slightly. That will do. Now put the key in the inside. Thank you. There's a queer old book I picked up and saw yesterday. Dear Drew and Drew Jits, published in Latin and Liege in the Lowlands in 1642. Charles' head was still firm. His shoulder was a little brown packed volume and was struck off. Who was the printer? Philip D. Croy, whoever he may have been. On the fly-leaf, at the very faded, is written Ex Libris William White. I wonder who William White was. Some practical of 17th century lawyer. I suppose this writing was the legal twist about it. Here comes our man, I think. As he spoke, there was a sharp ring at the bell. Sherlock Holmes rose softly and moved his chair. In the direction of the door, we heard his servant pass along the hall, and then a sharp click of the latch as he opened it. Does this one should be like, does Dr. Watson live here? Oh, it's clear. No, asked a clear but rather harsh voice. He could not hear the servant's reply, but the door closed and someone began to ascend the stairs. The footfall was an uncertain and shuffling one. A look of surprise passed over the face of my companion as he listened to it. It came slowly along the passage, and there was a feeble tap at it. Come in! Come in! I cried. At my summons, instead of the man of violence whom we expected, a very old and wrinkled woman hobbled into the apartment. She appeared to be dazzled by a sudden blaze of light, and after drooping tersely, she stood blinking at us with a bleared eyes and fumbling in her pockets with nervous, shaky fingers. I glanced at my companion with his face and had assumed that physical expression that it was all I could do to keep my countenance. The old crone drew at the evening papers and pointed at the advertisement. Oh, it was an old woman.
Is this as you brought me, good gentleman?
She said, dropping another curtsy.
A gold wedding ring in the Brixton Road? It belongs to my girl Sally. He was married over this 12th month, which her husband is starboard aboard in Union Port. And what we say he could come over to found her without a ring is more than I could think of. He being short enough to the best of times, but more especially when it has to drink. If it please you, she went to the circus last night along with...
Is that her ring? I asked.
The Lord be thanked, cried the old woman. Sally will be glad woman that's night. That's the ring.
And what may your address be? I inquired, taking a pencil.
13th, Duggett Street, Halsmith, a dray way from here.
The Brixton Road does not lie between the circus and Halsmith, said Sherlock Holmes sharply. The old woman faced round and looked keenly at him with her little red-rimmed eyes.
The gentleman asked me for my address, she said. Sally lives in lodging at 3 Mayfield Place, Peckham.
And your name is?
My name is Sawyer. Hers is at Dennis, which Tom Dennis married her, and a smart clean lad too. As long as he is at the sea, no starboard and the company have more than thought of it. But when on shore with the woman and with the liquor shops...
Here is your ring, Miss Sawyer, I interrupted, in obedience to the sign from my companion. It clearly belongs to your daughter, and I am glad to be able to restore it to its rightful owner. With many fumbled blessings and protestations of gratitude, the old crone packed it away with her pack in her pocket, and shuffled it down the stairs. Sherlock Holmes sprang to his feet at the moment that she was gone and rushed into his room. He returned in a few seconds enveloped in a whistler and a compliment. I'll follow her, he said hurriedly. She must have an accomplice, and it will lead me to him. Wait up for me. The hall door had harshly slammed behind our visitor before Holmes had ascended the stairs. Looking through the window, I could see her walking fleetly along the other side, while her pursuer dodged her some little distance behind. Either this whole theory is incorrect, I thought to myself, or else he will be led to the heart of the mystery. There was no need for me to ask to wait for him, for I felt the sleep as impossible until I heard the results of the adventure. It was close upon 9 when we set out. I had no idea how long it might be, but I sat slowly puffing on my pipe and skipping over the pages of Henry Berg's and Vol de Gaulle. 10 o'clock passed. I heard the footsteps of the maid as they pattered off the bed. 11, and more stated thread of a landlady passed my door, bound by the same destination. It was upon 12 before I heard the sharp sound of a latch key. The instant he entered, I saw that his visit had not been successful. Amusement and charges seemed to have been struggling for mastery, until the former suddenly carried the day. He was burst into a hearty laugh. I wouldn't have the Scotland Yarders know of it for the world, he cried, dropping to his chairs. I have chaffed them so much that they would never have let me hear the end of it. I can afford to laugh, because I know that I will be with them in the long run. What is it then? I asked. Oh, I don't mind telling the story against myself. That creature had gone a little way when she began to limp, and show every sign of a footsore. Presently she managed to halt, and then hailed a four-wheeler, which was passing. I managed to be close to her so that I could hear their dress, but I need to have not been so anxious, for she sang it out loud enough to be heard to the side of the street. Drive to 13, Duggett Street, Haunspit, she cried. This begins to look genuine, I thought, and having seen her safely inside, I perched myself behind. There's an art which every detective should be an expert at. Well, away we rattled, and never drew rein upon we reached the street in question. I hopped up before we came to the door, and strode down the street in an easy, long way. I saw the cab pull up. The driver jumped down, and saw him open the door and stand expectantly. Nothing came out, though. When I reached him, he was groping out from an empty cab, and giving vent to the finest ordered collection of oaths that ever elicited.
There was no sign or trace of Hester, and I fear it will be some time before he gets his fare. Unrequired at number 13, we found that this house belonged to a respectable paper hedger named Kiswick, with someone could named Kiswick, and that no one of that name, either of Sawyer or Dennis, had ever been heard of. You don't mean to say, I cried in amazement, that the taller, feeble old woman was able to get out of the cab while in motion, without either you or the driver seeing her? Old woman, be damned, said Sherlock Holmes sharply. We were the old woman to be mistaken in. It must have been a young man, and an attractive one. Besides, being able to incorporate an actor, the get-up was inimitable. He saw that it was falling, no doubt, and used the means to give me the slips. It shows that the man we are after was not as lonely as I imagined he was, but has friends who are ready to risk anything for him. Now, doctor, you are looking down up. Take my advice and turn in. I was certainly feeling very weary as I obeyed his injunctions. I left Holmes seated in front of his smoldering fire, and along into the watches of the night as I heard the low, melancholy wails of the violin, and knew that he was still pondering over the strange problem which he had set himself to unravel. End of chapter 5? End of chapter 5, everyone. Holy heck, this is actually getting pretty good. This is getting good, everyone. Don't mind if I take another sip of water. How is everyone enjoying the story? You guys are liking it. Let's let me click on this really quick. It's not over yet. We still got a long way to go. So, okay. Looking at this right now. Part 1. And then there's part 2. So, right now, for part 1, looks like there are about 2 more chapters. Chapter 6 and chapter 7. And then there's part 2, which I don't know if it's either a continuation or if it's just a different story. Well, I guess we'll find out eventually. So let's just go back to chapter 6. Okay. Thank you for the hydrate, Keo. Okay, we'll continue the story then. Chapter 6. Tobias Gretchen shows what he can do. The paper next to his were full of the Brixton mystery, as they termed it. Each had a long account of the affair, and some had lenders upon it in addition. There was some information which it was new to me. I still retained my scrapbook numerous clippings extracted bearing upon the case. There is a condensation in a few of them. The Daily Telegraph remarked that the history of crime there had seldom been tragedy which presented these stranger features. The German name of the victim, the absence of all the mothers, and the sinister description of the wall all point to the progression of political refugees and revolutionists. The Socialists had many branches in America, and the deceased had, no doubt, infringed their unwritten laws, had been tracked down by them. After looting air reach of the Vancouver Aqua Tabala and Marching to the Val and Darwin theory, the principles of Malwa and the Rockcliffe highway murders, they are concluded that admonishing the government and advocating closer watch over foreigners in England. I apologize about butchering a whole bunch of names there, everyone. The Standard commented upon the fact that lawless outrages of the sort usually occurred upon
after a liberal administration. They arose from the unsettled of the minds and the masses, and the consequences leaking of the authority. The deceased was an American gentleman who had been residing for some weeks in the metropolis. He had stayed in the boarding house of Madeleine Chapelain, in Etrecourt, Camberwell. He was accompanied by his travels as private secretary, Mr. Joseph Staggerson. The two bade adieu to the landlady upon Tuesday, the 4th insisted, and departed in Euston Station with the avowed intention of catching the Liverpool express. They were afterwards seen together upon the platform. Nothing more is known to them until Mr. Weber's body was reported, discovered in an empty house in Brixton Road, many miles from Euston. How he came there, and how he met his fate, are questions which are still involved in mystery. Nothing is known of the whereabouts of Staggerson. We are glad to learn that Mr. Lestrade and Mr. Gregson of Scotland Yard are both engaged upon the case, and it is confidently anticipated that these well-known officers will speedily throw light upon the matter. The Daily News observed that there is no doubt as to the crime being a political one. The disposition of hatred and liberalism which animated the continental government, which had the effect of driving out our shores a number of men who might have been citizens, for they were not soured by the recollection of all they had undergone. Among these men were the stringent code of honor, any infringement of which was punished by death. Every effort should be made to find the secretary of Staggerson, and to assert some particulars of the habits of the deceased. A great step had been gained by the discovery of the address of the house of which we had boarded. The result was entirely due to the acuteness and energy of Mr. Gregson of Scotland Yard. Sherlock Holmes and I read these notices over together at breakfast, and they appeared to be afford him a considerable amusement. I told you that, whatever happened, Lestrade and Gregson would be sure to score. That depends on how it turns out. Oh, bless you, it doesn't matter in the least. If the man is caught, it will be an unaccountable exertion. If he escapes, it will be in spite of their exertions. It heads I win and tails you lose. Whatever they do, they will have followers. Ut sut silva terras plus so alloc anomer. What on earth is this? I cried at this moment as they came to pattering at many steps of the hall and the stairs, accompanied by audible expression discussed upon the part of our landlady. It's the Baker Street Division of the Detective Police Force, said my companion, gravely as he spoke. There rushed in the room half a dozen of the dirtiest and most ragged street Arabs that ever I clapped eyes on. "Attention!" cried Holmes in a sharp tone, and the 6 dirty little scoundrels stood in a line like so many despicable resolutes. "In the future, you shall send Wiggins alone to report, and the rest of you must wait in the street. Have you found it, Wiggins?" "No, sir, we haven't," said one of the youths. "I expected you would. You must keep out until you do. Here are your wages. 13. He handed each of them a shilling. Now off you go, and come back with a better report next time." He waved his hand, and scampered down his downstairs with so many rats, and he heard them shrill voices the next moment in the street. "There's more work to be got out with those little beggars than out a dozen of horses," Holmes remarked. "The mere sight of an official-looking person steals men's sleeps. These youngsters, however, go everywhere and hear everything. They have the sharpest needles, too. All they want is an organization." "Is it on the Brixton case that you are employing them?" I asked. "Yes. There is a point at which I wish to assert. It is merely a matter of time. Hello. We are going to hear some news with vengeance. Here in Gregson's coming down the road, and BT written upon every feature in his face. Bound for us, I know. Yes, he is stopped. There he is." There was a violent peal of the bell. In a few seconds, the fair-haired detective came up the stairs, 3 steps at a time, and burst into our sitting room. "My dear fellow," he cried, wringing Holmes' unresponsive hand, "congratulate me. I have made the whole thing as clear as day." A shade of anxiety seemed to be across my companion's expressive face. "Do you mean that you were on the right track?" he asked. "That right track? Why, sir, we have the man under lock and key." "And his name is?" "Arthur Compelius, sub-lieutenant of His Majesty's Navy," cried Gregson. "Oh," snapped Gregson, consciously rubbing his fat hands and feeling his chest. Sherlock Holmes gave a sigh of relief and relaxed his smile.
Take a seat and try one of those cigars, he said. We are anxious to know how you managed it. Will you have some whiskey and water?
I don't mind if I do.
The detective answered. Wait, Brexit. Brexit. No, no, no. It should be. Okay, I'll just do it. I'll do the voice.
I don't mind if I do.
The detective answered.
The tremendous exertion which I had gone through the last day or two have worn me out. Not so much by the exertion, you understand. The strain on my mind, you will appreciate it, Mr. Holmes, Sherlock Holmes. For we are both brain workers.
You do me too much honor, said Holmes gravely. Let us hear how you arrived at the most gratifying result. The detective seated himself in the armchair and puffed the completion of the cigar. Then suddenly he slapped his thigh in a paroxysm of amusement.
The point of it is,
He cried.
that the fool Lestrade, who thinks himself so smart, has gone off upon the wrong track altogether. He is after the Secretary Staggerson, who had no more to do with the crime than the babe unborn. I have no doubt he was caught him by this time.
The idea tickled Gregson so much he laughed until he choked. And how did you get your clue?
Oh, I'll tell you all about it, of course. Dr. Watson, this is strictly between ourselves. The first difficulty which we had to consider was the find of the Americans' antecedents. Some people would have waited until the advertisements were answered, or until the parties came forward and volunteered information. That is not Tobias Gregson's way of going to work. You remember the hat beside the dead man?
Yes, said Holmes. By John Underwood and Sons, 129 Camberwell Road.
It looked quite.
Gregson looked quite crestfallen.
I had no idea that you noticed that,
He said.
that you've been there.
No,
Ha!
cried Gregson in a relieved voice. You have never neglected a chance.
You should never neglect a chance, however small it may seem.
To the great mind, nothing is left, remarked Holmes insidiously.
Well, I went to the Underwood and asked him if he was sold a hat at that size description. He looked over his books and came in at once. He had sent the hat to Mr. Deborah, residing at Chapler's boarding establishment, Carpet Terrace. Thus I had got his address.
Smart, very smart, murmured Sherlock Holmes.
I next came upon Madame Chapler, continued the detective. I found her very pale and distressed. Her daughter was in the room too. An uncomely fine girl she is too. She was looking red about the eyes and lips trembled as I spoke to her. That didn't escape my notice. I began to smell a rat. You know the feeling, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. When you came upon the right scent, a kind of thrill in your nerves. Have you ever heard of the mystery death of the late boarder, Mr. Enoch J. Drebler of Cleveland? I asked.
The mother nodded.
The mother nodded. She didn't seem to be able to get out a word. The daughter burst into tears, and I felt more than ever that these people knew something of the matter.
What o'clock did Mr. Deborah leave your house for the train, I asked?
At 8 o'clock.
At 8 o'clock, she said,
Opened the scope in the throat. He broke down agitation.
His secretary, Mr. Jackson, said that there were two trains, one at 9:15 and one at 11. He was to catch the first. 14.
And what was the last time which you saw him?
A terrible change came over the woman's face as I asked the question. Her features turned into perfectly vivid. It was seconds before she could get out the unstaged word, yes. And when it did come, it was a husky and natural tone. There was a silence. There was a silence for a moment, and the daughter spoke calm to a clear voice. No good ever would have come in falsehood, mother, she said. Let us be frank with this gentleman. You did see Mr. Deborah again. God forbid you! Cried Madame Chapler, throwing up her hands and shaking Deck in the chair. You have murdered your brother! Arthur would rather have you spoke the truth, the girl answered firmly. You had best tell me all about it.
You had best tell me all about it now, I said. Half confidence are worse than none. Besides, you do not know how much we know of it.
On your head be it, Alice, cried her mother.
and then turning to me. I will tell you all, sir. Do not imagine the magician on behalf of my son arises from the fear lest he should have had a terrible affair. He is utterly innocent of it. My dread is, however, that your eyes of the others may appear to be compromised. That, however, is surely impossible. His high character, his profession, his antecedents will all be forbidden. Your best way to make clear the rest of the facts, I answered. Depend upon it, your son is innocent. He will be none the worse. Perhaps, Alice, you had better leave us together, he said, and her daughter withdrew. Now, sir, she continued, I have no intention of telling you all this, but since my poor daughter has disclosed it, I have no alternative. Having once decided to speak, I will tell you all without omitting any particular. It is your wisest course, I said. Mr. Devlin has been with us nearly 3 weeks. He and his secretary, Mr. Shankerson, have been traveling to Cotton. I noticed a Copenhagen labeled upon each of their trunks, showing that they had been in their last stopping place. Staggerson was a quiet man, reserved, but his employer, I am sorry to say, was far otherwise. He was coarse in his habits and brutish in his ways. The very night of his start became very much the worse for drink, and indeed, after 12 o'clock that day, he could hardly ever be said to be sober. His manners towards all the maid servants were distinguishedly free and familiar. Worst of all, he seemingly assumed the same attitude towards my daughter, Alice, and spoke to her more than once in one way which, unfortunately, was too innocent to understand. On one occasion he actually seized her in her arms and embraced her, an outrage has caused his own secretary to reproach him for his unmanly conduct. But why did you stand all this? I asked. I suppose you can get rid of the boarders when you wish. Mrs. Shapley blushed as a permanent question. Would to God that I had given him notice of every day that he came, he said, but it was sore temptation. They were paying £1 a day each, £14 a week, and this was a slack season. I am a widow, and my boy in the Navy has cost me much. I grudged to lose the money, and I acted at best. That last was too much, however, that I gave him notice to leave on account of it. That was the reason of his going. Well, my heart grew light when I saw him drive away. My son is on leave just now, but I did not tell him anything of all this, for his temper is violent, and he is passionately fond of his sister. When I closed the door behind them, a load seemed to be lifted from my mind. Alas, in less than an hour, there was a ring in the bell, and I learned that Mr. Devlin had returned. He was much excited, and evidently the worse for drink. He forced his way into the room where I was sitting with my daughter, and made the same incoherent remark about having missed the train. He then turned to Alice, and before my very face proposed to her that she should fly with him. You are of age, he said, and there is no law to stop you. I have money enough to spare. Never mind the old girl to you, but come along with me now straight away. You shall live like a princess. Poor Alice was so frightened that she shrunk away from him, but he caught her by the wrist and endeavored to draw her towards the door. I screamed, and at that moment my son Arthur came into the room. What happened then I do not know. I heard oaths and confused sounds of a scuffle. I was too terrified to raise my hand. When I did look up, I saw Arthur standing in the doorway laughing with a stick in his hand. I don't think this fine fellow will trouble us again, he said. I will just go after him and see what he does to himself. And with those words he took his hat and started off down the street. The next morning we heard of Mr. Derby's mysterious death. This statement came from Miss Chapman's lips with a great many gasps and pauses. At times she spoke so low that I could hardly catch the words that made shorthand notes of all she said. However, so that there should be no possibility of a mistake. It's quite exciting, said Sherlock Holmes with a yawn. What happened next? Well, Miss Chapman paused. The detective continued. I saw that the whole case was hung upon one point. Fixing her with the eye in which I would always found effective with women. I asked her what hour her son returned. I do not know, she answered. Not know. No. He was latchkey. He let himself in. So you went to bed? Yes. When did you go to bed? At about 11. So your son was gone for at least 2 hours,
Yes,
possibly 4 or 5.
yes.
What was he doing during that time?
I do not know, she answered, turning white in her very lips.
Of course, there was nothing more to be done. I found out where Lieutenant Chaplin was, took 2 officers with me, and arrested him. When I touched him on the shoulder and warned him to come quietly with us, he answered with as bold as brass. I suppose you arrested me for the concern of my death of the scoundrel Drebber, he said. We had nothing to him about it, so the eluding had the most suspicious aspect.
Very, said Holmes.
He still carried away with the heavy stick with the mother described when as having him with whom is his father Drebber. It was a stout oak puddle.
What is your theory then?
Well, my theory is that he followed Drebber as far as the Brixton Road. When there, a fresh altercation arose between them, in the course of which Drebber received a blow from the stick, in the pit of his stomach, perhaps, one which killed him with leaving a winning mark. The night was so wet that one wood was about, that Shepard dragged the body to the victim at the empty house. As to the candle, the blood, and the writing on the wall, and the ring, they all seemed to be many tricks to throw the police on the wrong scent.
Well done, said Holmes in an encouraging voice. Really, Gregson, you are getting along. We shall make something out of you yet.
I flattered myself that I managed to rattle neatly, the detective answered. The young man volunteered a statement in which he said that was after following Drebber. After some time the latter perceived him, and he took a cab in order to get him away. On his way, he met an old shipmate, and took a long walk with him. On being asked where his old shipmate lived, he was unable to give an unsatisfactory reply. I think the whole case fits together uncommonly well. What amuses me is to think of Lestrade, who has started off upon the wrong scent. I'm afraid he won't make much of 15. Why, by Jove, there is the very man himself.
It was indeed Lestrade who had ascended the stairs while we were talking, and now who entered the room. The assurance and jauntiness which generally marked his demeanor, and dress too, however, were wanting. His face was disturbed and troubled, while his clothes were disarrayed and untidy. He had evidently come up with the intention of consulting with Sherlock Holmes, and for on perceiving his colleagues, he appeared to be embarrassed and put out. He stood in the centre of the room, fumbled nervously at his hat, and uncertain of what to do. This is a most extraordinary case, he said at last. A most incomprehensible affair. Ah, you find it so, Mr. Lestrade.
You find it so, Mrs. Stride,
Cried Gregson promptly.
I thought you would come to the conclusion if you managed to find the secretary of Mr. Joseph Staggerson.
The secretary, Mr. Joseph Staggerson, said Lestrade gravely, was murdered at Holiday's private hotel about 6 o'clock this morning. End of chapter 6. Oh, okay. Water. I'm gonna drink water, y'all. Okay. Okay. So, this is what's gonna happen, everyone. I know, did say it was gonna be like a one-time solo stream, but I'm thinking we should have a part 2. So this is gonna be the last chapter, because the next chapter is gonna be like part 2. So we still got like another 6 to 7 more chapters of that. So we're gonna finish this chapter and then end it for tonight. I think that sounds okay. Not to mention my voice is starting to get a little bit hoarse. I don't read that very often. Out loud, of course. Okay. Let me just settle down again. Hydrate. Thank you. Oh god. And I do apologize about those lines too. They were a little bit weird. Like, they just
kind of wish that they would tell me exactly who was I talking to.
Okay.
Let's read the final chapter, everyone. Chapter 7. Light in the Darkness. The intelligence which the straw greeted us was so spontaneous and so unexpected that we were all fairly dumbfounded. Gregson sprang out of his chair and upset the remainder of his whiskey and water. I stared in silence at Sherlock Holmes, whose lips were compressed and his brow drained down over his eyes. "Staggerson too," he muttered. "The plot thickens." "It is quite thick enough before," grumbled Lestrade, taking a chair. "I seem to have dropped into a sort of council of war." Are you sure that this piece of it? Are you sure of this piece of intelligence?" stammered Gregson. I have just come from this room," said Lestrade. "I was the first to discover what had occurred." "We have been hearing Gregson's view of the matter," Holmes observed. "Would you mind telling us more of what you've seen and done?" "I have no objection," Lestrade answered, seating himself. "I freely confess that I was of the opinion that Staggerson was concerned in the death of Drebber. The first development was shown to me that I was completely mistaken. Full of one idea, I set myself to find out what had become of the secretary. They had been seen together at Euston Station about 8:30 at the evening of the 3rd. At 2 in the morning, Drebber had been found in the Brixton Road. The question which confronted me was to find out how Staggerson had been unemployed between 8:30 and the time of the crime, and what had become of him afterwards. I telegraphed to Liverpool, giving a description of the man and a warning them to keep a watch upon the American boats. I then set myself to work of calling the hotels and lodging houses in the vicinity of Euston. You see, I argued that if Drebber and his companions had become separated, the natural course of the latter would be to put somewhere in the vicinity of the night, and then to hang about the station again the next morning. "They would be likely to be on some meeting place beforehand," remarked Holmes. So it proved. I spent the whole of yesterday evening making inquiries entirely about without avail. This morning I began to very eagerly. At 8 o'clock I reached Holliday's private hotel in Little George Street. On my inquiry as to whether Mr. Sherlock was living there, they at once answered me in affirmative. "No doubt you are a gentleman who has been expecting," they said. "He has been waiting for the gentleman for 2 days." "Where is he now?" I asked. "He is upstairs in bed. He wished to be called at 9. "I will go up and see him at once," I said. It seemed to me that my sudden appearance might shake his nerves and lead him to say something unguarded. The boots volunteered to show me the room. It was on the second floor, but there was a small corridor leading to it. The boots pointed out the door to me, and was about to go downstairs again when I saw something that made me feel sickish, in spite of my 20 years' experience. From under the door there was a curled up little red ribbon of blood, which had meandered across the passage and formed a little pool along the skirting of the edges of the side. I gave a cry, which brought the boots back. He nearly fainted when he saw it. The knock was locked and the room inside, but we put our shoulders to it and knocked it in. The window in the living room was open, and beside the window, all huddled up, lay a man, body of the man in his nightdress. He was quite dead, and it had been some time, for his limbs were rigid and cold. When we turned him over, the boots recognized him at once that he was the same gentleman who had engaged the room under the name of Joseph Staggerson. The cause of death was a deep stab in his left side, which was the penetrated of heart. And now that the strangest part of the affair, what do you suppose is about the murdered man? I felt a creeping of the flesh, and the presentiment of the coming horror, even before Sherlock Holmes answered. "The word Roch, written in the letters of blood," he said. "That was it," said Lestrade. Wait. "That was it," said Lestrade in an awestruck voice, and we were all silent for a while. There was something so methodical and so purposeful, incomprehensible about the deeds of this unknown assassin, that imparted a fresh ghastliness of his charms. My nerves, which were steady enough on the field of battle, changed as I thought of it.
The man was seen in the straw. A milk boy passed on his way to the dairy, having to walk down the lane, which leads from the mews to the back of the hotel. We noticed that a ladder, which usually lay there, was raised against one of the windows of the second floor, which was wide open. After passing, we looked back and saw a man descend the ladder. He came down so quietly and openly that the boy imagined him to be some carpenter or joiner at work at the hotel. He took no particular notice of him, beyond thinking of his own mind that it was early for him to be at work. He has an impression that the man was tall, had a reddish face, and was dressed in a long brownish coat. He must have stayed in the room some little time after the murder. We found the blood-stained water in the basin, where he had washed his hands, and marks on the sheets where he had deliberately wiped his blood. I glanced at Holmes after hearing a description of the murder, which tallied so exactly as his own. There was, however, no trace of exclamation or satisfaction upon his face. "Did you find nothing in the room which could furnish a clue to the murder?" he asked. "Nothing. The secretary had Drebber's purse in his pocket, but it seems that this was unusual, as he did all the paying. There was 80 odd pounds in it, but nothing had been taken. Whatever motive of these extraordinary crimes, robbery is certainly not one of them. There was no papers or memorandum in the murdered man's pockets, except a single telegram dated in Cleveland about a month ago, and contained the words J.H. as in Euro. There was no name apprehended in this message." "And there was nothing else?" Mr. Holmes asked. "Nothing of importance. The man's novel, which he had read himself to sleep, was laying upon the bed, and his pipe was on the chair beside him. There was a glass of water on the tables, and the window was still a small chip of ointment box containing a couple of pills." Sherlock Holmes sprang to his chair with an exclamation of delight. "Last link!" he cried exclamation. "My case is complete." One moment, hydrate. The two detectives stared at him in amazement. I have now in my hands," my companion said confidently, "all the threads which form such a tangle. There are, of course, details to be filled, but I am certain that these main facts, that from the time the Drebber started from Stuyvesant to the station up to discover the body of the latter, as I have seen with my own eyes, I will give you proof of my knowledge. Would you lay your hands upon those pills?" "I have them," said the Lestrade, producing a small white box. "I took them and the purse and the telegram, intended to have them put on their place of safety in the police station. It was the merest chance by taking these pills, and I am bound to say that I do not attach any importance to them." "Give them here," said Holmes. "Now, doctor, tell me," turning to me, "are those ordinary pills?" "Wow." "Hi, Mama. Hi, Raiders. Welcome, welcome. Yoka, hi. My name's Luke. I'm Sugami. My partner in crime is Kitty Crow Tengu by name Kyo. We're dual streamers, but we're doing a solo night reading. Thank you for the shout out, Kyo." Oh, that's so weird. We gotta fix that later. Currently, the shadow is very small. And it looks like you were playing Porch Party. Oh, and thank you for the follow, Slothing. Look, you're now a cave dweller. Yes, we actually are doing... Oh! Nice. I do not know what Corpse Party is. I just know that it's based off... I've read the manga. And it's disturbing. I assume that's... If it's correct, or if that's what I'm thinking about. Anyways, I gotta see it. Either way, congratulations. Oh, it's gruesome. Okay, then it might be the one I'm thinking about. But I'm glad you had fun. I hope you had fun. It is going well. Apparently, this is actually the last chapter, so there's not going to be a second reading of a solo night's solo reading, which is good. That's good. That's good. Nice. Nice. Okay. Let's continue, everyone. Sorry about that. Okay. Have a nice lurk. Oh, and if anyone wants to stay, you're more than welcome to stay, anyone. If you don't, that's okay. Just saying like a little hi and then a bye is also fine too. Okay. Okay, we'll read the guy. Give them here, said Holmes. Now, doctor, turn to me. Are those ordinary pills? They certainly were not. They were pearly gray color, small, round, and almost transparent against the light. From the lightness and transparency, I should imagine that they are soluble in water, I remarked. Precisely so, answered Holmes. Now, would you mind going down and fetching the poor little devil of a terrier which has been bad so long, and which the landlady wanted you to put on an outpain yesterday? Wait. You fetching that poor little devil of a terrier which was been so bad so long, which the landlady wanted you to put out of its pain yesterday? Oh no, I'm gonna kill a puppy, y'all. I went downstairs to carry the dog upstairs in my arm. Its labored breathing and glazing eyes showed that it was not far from its end. Indeed, its snow-white muzzle proclaimed that it had already exceeded the usual term of canine existence. I placed it upon the cushion of the rug. I will now cut one of these pills in two, said Holmes, and drawing his penknife, he suited his action for word. One half will be returned in the box, for future purposes. The other half I will place in the wine glass, in which is a teaspoon of water. You perceive that our friend, the doctor, is right, and is ready to dissolve. This may be very interesting, said Lestrade, as the injured tone of one who will suspect that he's being laughed at. I cannot see, however, that it would have to do with the death of Mr. Joseph Daggerson. Patience, my friend, patience. You find in time that has everything to do with it. I shall now add a little milk to make it mixture palatable, and I'll present it to the dog to find that he laughs it up readily enough. As he spoke, I turned the contents of the wine glass into the saucer and placed it in front of the terrier, who speedily licked it dry. Sherlock Holmes' earnestly demeanor had so far convinced us that we all sat silent, watched the animal intently, and certainly some startling effect. None such appeared. However, the dog continued to lie stretched on the 16 cushion, breathing a labored way, but apparently neither the better nor the worse for his trot. Holmes had taken out his watch, and as the minute followed, a minute without result. An expression of the utmost chagrin and disappointment appeared upon his features. He gnawed his teeth, his lip, drummed his fingers upon the table, and showed every other symptom of acute impatience. So great was the emotion that I felt sincerely sorry for him, while the two detectives smiled decisively, by no means displeased by his cheeks which they had not met. It can't be a coincidence, he cried, at last springing from his chair and pacing the wall up and down the room. It is impossible that it should be done mere coincidence. The very pills which suspected the case of Drebber are actually found at the death of Staggerson, and yet they are inert. What can it mean? Surely my whole chain of reasoning cannot have been false. It is impossible, and yet this wretched dog is none of the worse. Ah, I have it! I have it! With a perfect shriek of delight, and he rushed to the box, cut the other pill in two, dissolved it, added it, and presented it to the terrier. The unfortunate creature's tongue seemed hardly to have been moistened on it before he gave a considerable shiver in every limb, as he lay as wretched and lifeless as he had been struck by lightning. Oh no, sad puppy. Goodbye, puppy. Sherlock Holmes drew a long breath and wiped perspiration from his forehead. I should have more faith, he said. I ought to know by this time that the fact appears to be opposed to the long train of deductions. It invariably proves to be capable of bearing some other interpretation. Of the two pills in the box, one was the most deadly poison, the other one was entirely harmless. I ought to have known that before ever I saw the box at all. The last statement appeared to me so startling that I could hardly believe that it was his sober senses. There was a dead dog. However, to prove that his conjecture had been correct, it seemed to me that the mist of my own mind was gradually clearing away, and I began to have a dim, vague perception of the truth. Ah, this seems strange to you, continued Holmes, because you failed at the beginning of the
inquiry to grasp the importance of a single real clue, which was presented to you. I had the good fortune to seize upon that and everything which had occurred since that has served to confirm my original supposition, and indeed was the logical sequence of it. Hence things that would have been perplexed you and I have made the case more obscure, have served to lighten me and strengthen my conclusion. It is my mistake not to find strangeness with the mystery. The most commonplace crime is often the most mysterious place because it presents no new or special features which a deduction may be drawn. This murder would have been infinitely more difficult to unravel had the body of the victim been simply found lying on the road without any of those artery or sensational accompaniments which have been rendered it remarkable. These strange details, far from making it the case more difficult, had the effect of making it so less. Mr. Gregson, who had listened to the address with considerable patience, could contain himself no longer.
Look here, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, he said. We are ready to acknowledge that you are a smart man, and that you have your own methods of working. We want something more than a theory preaching out. Though if this case of taking the man, I have made my case, and it seems I was wrong. Young Tupper could not have been engaged in that second affair. Lestrade went after this man, Saracen, and it appears that he was wrong too. You have thrown out all hints out here, and the hints there, and it seems no more than we do. But the time has come for you to feel that we have a right to ask you straight how much do you know of the business. Can you name the man who did it?
I cannot help feeling that Gregson is right, sir, remarked Lestrade. We have both tried and have both failed. You have remarked more than once since I have been in the room, and he had all the evidence which you acquired. Surely you have not withheld it any longer. Any delay arresting the assassin, observed, might it give you time to perpetrate some fresh atrocity? Thus pressed by us all, Holmes showed any sign of irresolution. He continued to walk up and down the room, with his head sunk on his chair and his brows drawn down, as his habit was when he's lost in thought. There is no more murders, he said, last stopping abruptly after facing us. You can put that consideration out of the question. You have asked me if I know the name of the assassin. I do. The mere knowing that his name is a small thing. However, compared to with the power of laying our hands upon him, this is I expect very shortly to do. I have good hopes of managing it through my own arrangements. But it is a thing which needs delicate handling, for we have a shrewd and desperate man to deal with, who will support it, so as to have occasion to prove by another who is the cleverer himself. As long as this man has no idea that anyone have a clue, there is some chance of securing him. But if he has slightest suspicion, he would change his name and vanish in an instant among the 4 million inhabitants of this great city. Without meaning to hurt either of your feelings, I am bound to say that I consider these men to be more than a match for the official force, and that is why I have not asked your assistance. If I fail, I shall, of course, incur all the blame due to omission. But that I am prepared, for, at present, I am ready to promise that, for the instance I communicate with you with the endangering of my own combination, I shall do so. Gregson and Lestrade seemed to be in fair satisfied with the assurance of my depreciated illusion of detective police. The former had flushed up the roots with the flaxen hair, while the other's beady eyes glistened with curiosity and resentment. Neither of them had time to speak. However, before there was a tap at the door, the spokesman of the street's airboats, young Wiggins, introduced an insignificant and unsavory person. Please, sir, he said, touching his forelock, have the cab downstairs. Good boy, said Holmes blandly. Why don't you use this pattern of Scotland Yard? He continued, taking a pair of steel handcuffs from the drawer. See how beautiful the spring works? They fasten in an instant. The old pattern is good enough, remarked Lestrade, if we could only find the man to put them on. Very good, said Holmes, smiling. The cabman may as well help me with boxes. Just ask him to step in. Wiggins. I was surprised to find my companion speaking as though we were about to set on a journey, since Hugh had not said anything to me about it. There was no small opportunity on the front, and he pulled out and began to strap. He was busy engaged until when the cabman entered the room. Just give me a help with the book, old cabman, he said, kneeling over his task and never turning his head. The fellow came forward, and with somewhat sullen, defiant air, and put down his hand to assist. At the instant there was a sharp click, the jangling of the metal, and Sherlock Holmes sprang to his feet again. Gentlemen, he cried with the flashing eyes. "Let me introduce you to Mr. Jefferson Hope, the murderer of Enoch Drebber and the Joseph Staggerson." The whole thing occurred in a moment, so quickly that I had no time to realize it. I have a vivid recollection of the instant that Holmes' triumphant expression in the ring of his voice, of the cabin's dazed, savage face as he glared at the glittering handcuffs, which had appeared as if by magic upon his wrists. For a second or two we might have been a group of statues. In an articulate roar of fury, the prisoner wrenched himself free from Holmes' grasp and hurled himself through the window woodwork, and glass gave him before him. But before he got quite through, Gregson, Lestrade, and Holmes sprang up upon him with so many stagful hounds. He was dragged back to the room, and then commenced a terrific conflict. So powerful and so fierce was he that the four of us were shaken off again and again. He appeared to have convulsive strength of a man in impotent fit. His face and hands were terribly mangled by his passions through the glass, but loss of blood had no effect in diminishing his resistance. It was not until Lestrade succeeded in getting his hand inside the neckcloth and half strangling him that he made him realize that his struggles were of no avail. And even then he felt no security until he had pinioned his feet as well as his hands. That done, we rose to our feet breathless and panting. "We have his cab," said Sherlock Holmes. "It will serve to take him to Scotland Yard. And now, gentlemen," he continued with a pleasant smile, "we have reached the end of our little mystery. You are very welcome to put any questions that you like to me now, and there is no danger that I will refuse to answer." Huh? Wait. Did it end? Let me check. Give him everyone. Wait. Skimming. Skimming past chapter 2 now? Hi, Keenan. Wait. Did I? Huh. I think we finished it. This is... Okay. So, from what I'm understanding... Okay, so let me see. A Study in Scarlet, 1887, marked the first appearance of Sherlock Holmes and John Watson, M.D. The character Holmes was modeled after Joseph Bell, one of those university professors. Part 2, The Country of the Saints, deals much with the Mormon church set in Utah. Oh, okay. So I guess, okay. So from what I understand, part 1 pretty much is like its own case called A Study in Scarlet, and part 2 pretty much deals with another case, which is different. So there we go. Total recap then. Dr. Watson meets Sherlock Holmes in chapter 1. And in chapter 2 as well. And then he Sherlock Holmes shows the deduction skills, just from observing the person. Chapter 3 looks like there was a murder. Chapter 4, yeah, chapter 3 is some sort of murder, and chapter 4, 5, 6 pretty much tells you how everyone tries to find the murderer, and then chapter 7 is the conclusion. Oh, okay. I did it, everyone! Congratulations! Yay! Woo! I made it, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that story. I did not think I'd actually want to make it that far.
with that in mind, I have finally redeemed the solo Luca reading stream from the 24-hour subathon. So yay! Thank you, user. Thank you, everyone, for staying by. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and rate some. Who should we rate today? Kyo, you still here? She's probably not here. She's probably sleeping. Ooh. Well, I know what we're gonna do. I will, Silo. Thank you. We're gonna go. Okay. Well, why don't we keep this ASMR thing about going? So we're gonna go ahead and raid Wheelie. Okay. So the top line, there are two messages for the raid message. If you still want to come, if you do not want to, that's okay. Totally, it's up to you. First message, it's pretty much free if you're not a follower or subscriber to us. So it's universal. You can actually use that. Otherwise, if you are subscribed to us, the second line for Nightbob is available. It's copy and paste it, so you can use that command. Otherwise, I hope you actually enjoyed Sherlock Holmes story. It was like very interesting. I may not understand some of the city or locations, but it was a very interesting story. I kind of liked it. It was kind of easy to understand. It wasn't like very old like the other story Minky usually read, like that Robin and Lux, Robin Hood and all that junk. I mean, those words were hard. This one was actually very easy to read. So, didn't have like a lot of words, and actually kind of had like that dialogue between back and forth the characters. Otherwise, yeah, that's pretty much it. Tomorrow is going to be Wednesday, or today is Wednesday, so we're going to have another Fallout 4 stream. Okay, that's it. I'm sorry, everyone. I love you all. Have a nice night, and enjoy the rest of your night, too. Goodbye. Goodbye-bye. Later.